All right, so welcome everyone to the first inaugural Web Summit for Web3. EIT Silicon Valley Hub is presenting a series of Web3 sessions. The goal of these sessions is to not only explore what Web3 is, but also to identify where opportunity and value can be created or where it already is today. We'll also dig into some interesting side topics like the possibilities for Web3 to have impact on the world, and we'll also look at some of the emergent landscape. That being said, I'll go ahead and kick us forward into the beginning of our session. We'll have just a couple moments here on trying to get an understanding of what Web3 in general is. I'll be doing the first session. My name is John Michael Scott, and I just want to say welcome to everybody who's in attendance. Okay, so what exactly is Web3? I mean, there's a lot of points of view about this. Web3 is not a simple topic. There's not like a single definition. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get a lot of different points of view. Tim Berners-Lee, one of the, originators of the web in general, has some very strong opinions about it, and he's actually talked about it last week. One of the things he mentioned, and I'm sort of misusing his quote a little bit here, but Web3 is a hypothetical future version of the internet that's more decentralized than it is today and not dominated by a handful of powerful players such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. I think it's maybe a little bit more interesting, and Samira and I have talked about this. Samira is the director for the EIT Hub Silicon Valley, who we saw on our introductory screen. We've talked about this a little bit, and one of the things that we think is maybe useful as far as establishing our point of view is to consider that the Web3 is a place where the web works for people rather than requiring us to come to it. So whether you're looking at IoT and robotics, looking at crypto and DeFi, all of these experiences and technologies should help us to be more successful. They should be tools for us, and they should help us to advance. Just to look at some of the general definitions out there in the world, one of the general definitions that Investopedia suggests is that it's described as decentralization, trustlessness and permissionlessness, and connectivity and ubiquity. To dig into that just a little bit further, decentralization implies that we're going to be able to have content and our tools scattered across the globe. They'll be not reliant on a few specific players. Like Facebook couldn't turn off, or Meta now couldn't just turn off an app and say that's no longer available to us. Snapchat couldn't say we're no longer going to offer those features. These kinds of decentralized applications and decentralized content are spread across the globe and in general controlled by the users rather than controlled by large institutionalized bodies or organizations or what have you. What is trustlessness and permissionlessness? Well, in general, it kind of implies that you don't have to go to a single broker in order to establish initial trust. So we can connect directly in peer-to-peer networks. We can use peer-to-peer approaches to govern applications, to govern choices, to govern even decentralized autonomous organizations. All those things are enabled through being able to use blockchain or other tools to connect us together that don't require a trust broker to be an intermediary controlling the process. Ubiquity and connectivity, essentially, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter where the content is, you should be able to get to it no matter what. As far as some of the technologies that you may hear about in the sessions that we're going to have today, there will be some discussion of blockchain and distributed ledgers. There'll be some discussion of potentially of cryptocurrency and decentralized finance, non-fungible tokens in the metaverse, Internet of Things and robotics, artificial intelligence and machine learning. All these things may come up in the panel sessions ahead. Let me go ahead and at this point then make a brief introduction. we're going to hear from Samira G. Curtis. Samira is the director of EIT's Hub Silicon Valley. She's been building up the visibility of EIT within the United States and within Silicon Valley. And I'm going to turn it over to her to talk a little bit about what the national R&D priorities and the role of EIT in this, the US ecosystem, the Silicon Valley ecosystem, et cetera.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for attending today. I still see the number of attendees going up, so apparently some of the people would just miss the first introduction. So it's good that I start first because I wanted to ask Laurent to do the EIT speech first, but I'm going to talk about only our objectives in the United States because the overall explanation about who EIT is, I would like to leave it to my colleague Laurent, and he's going after me to explain all about it. Our mission is as EIT Hubs. So EIT stands for European Institution for Innovation and Technology. And our mission is we are the largest ecosystem. That's what I want to give it to in Europe. And one of our reasons actually to have this kind of sessions is also to give more visibility about EIT and what we do actually for in cross. We have two hubs. We have one in Silicon Valley and one in Israel. And again, more about that, Laurent is going to talk about it. Our mission is, you know, EIT Hub was set just to seek to create valuable and at this moment revenue-producing relationship between the EIT community, the EU innovation ecosystem, and the US innovation ecosystem to support the growth of innovative startups. Additionally, EIT Hub we seek to facilitate knowledge exchange, encourage investments, and promote development of future tech, aligning corporation and startup in a mutually valuable cycle of creative innovation. So I enjoyed EIT 5 months ago, and my background is investment and technologies. So I'm a computer science major, and I lived in Europe my entire life. I was raised there, and I moved to the United States 7 years ago. And I must say, it's what I see from European innovation agenda. It's very fair, inclusive, and sustainable. And for me to have an impact in the world, I think if I support innovation agenda of Europe, I feel like I can have an impact in the world, because with the agenda that they have, it's just not possible to not be fair and to be sustainable. So there are 3 areas that we are focusing in the United States. That's innovation, entrepreneurship, ecosystem, and entrepreneurial education. So in education, we are working with some of the top universities in the United States to, you know, promote our educations in Europe. And on the innovation side, we are helping. We are setting up right now a program for our startups that they come from Europe, and they are actually at the level that they want to scale to United States market, helping them to get to become the next unicorn, I would like to say. So, and extend to the United States market. That have said, I would just leave it here, and I'd like to give it to Laurent. And Laurent, please introduce yourself, and please tell us all about EIT and what the great things we are doing all. Thank you.
Thank you, Samira. And I would probably just share my presentation, unless, okay, on Michael, maybe you can, yeah, okay.
Yep, hold on one, or Samira, are you switching? Here, I'll switch.
And of course, I can see also the numbers of attendees are still growing, so okay, show my screen, yeah, very good. So I will then go to this one, and then you tell me if this is okay.
Yep, we're seeing on your screen right now.
Okay, perfect. I will put in presentation mode. Okay, full screen, I suppose. So welcome everybody, and thanks Samira for the introduction, and John Michael as well. So indeed, this is the first webinar that the EIT Global Outreach Silicon Valley Hub is organizing on Web 3.0. I will try to give you in a few slides what the EIT is about in Europe and also across the world. So as Samira said, we have 2 global offices, one in Silicon Valley and one in Israel. And my name is Laurent Roux, so I work at the headquarters here in Budapest for the organization called EIT. I'm head of innovation capacity part of the innovation ecosystem unit. So EIT is actually a very unique innovation instrument. We are part of the Horizon Europe innovation program with the Commission. We have a few key objectives, such as enhancing Europe innovation capacity, competitiveness, and quality of life. And this is also refers now to what Samira was saying, the values that Europe tries to promote. Obviously, we are at the basis of EIT is the knowledge triangle integration. So we have thousands of partners in all sides of the knowledge triangle integration. So mainly the universities, the large, small, and medium-sized businesses, as well as the research institute. And we also have many partners, such as local governments, NGOs, and so on. We address societal challenges, all the main ones that Europe and the world face. And we have some unique features, and I'll go into more details in my presentation. Essentially, we are a pan-European network of innovation ecosystem. We have this long-term view of financing from the Horizon Europe budget between 7 and 15 years around the different topics and the different societal challenges. And we really try to also build ecosystems that are financially sustainable. So here to continue after the funding from us, from the EIT ends after 7 or 15 years. So yeah, we're connecting the dots with EIT. So the global challenges, a lot of our program and activities are on entrepreneur education. We provide some policy input to our colleagues and partners in Europe, many also the Commission, the European Parliament, and a lot of knowledge is coming from the activities of the innovation ecosystems we build. There is a lot about the EIT community. It's composed obviously of all the actors in the different communities themselves, but also we have a large community of EIT alumni, meaning coming from our education and business creation activities. So it's more than 14,000 members now in Europe, and also some of them live and work abroad, such as in the US, Asia, and Africa. We address all the SDGs, and I will be more specific, but many of our innovation ecosystem, innovation communities work on one or several of these SDGs that are very important and set by the UN. So EIT is actually not that young. We started in 2008, and initially as dedicated budget from the Commission to launch the first few innovation committees. So Samira is also working with very closely with EIT Digital, which is one of the first innovation committees we set up in 2010. So this was the startup and build-up phase, building 3 first communities: EIT Digital, EIT InnoEnergy, and EIT Climate KIC, developing the model, all the processes behind to fund these organizations so they can deploy the money into activities in Europe. Then we went in phase 2, which was integration into Horizon 2020, which was the large innovation program of the Commission at the time. So adding more communities to our series of ecosystem: EIT Health, EIT Raw Materials, and EIT Food, and also EIT Urban Mobility and EIT Manufacturing. So a lot of governance to be put in place, a lot of initial results and impact, and starting to really also have the innovation communities work with each other more closely. And now we are in phase 3, so we are part of Horizon Europe, which is the running innovation program for Europe for this 2021-2027 period. So global ambition, some investment fund also that some KICs innovation committees are setting up. And again, increased cooperation across the different instruments that the European Union has for supporting innovation. So we are working closely with our colleague from the European Innovation Council, European Investment Fund, European Investment Bank, and many others that can help multiply the impact of our different investments. So for the Horizon Europe period, we have close to 3 billion euro to invest. So we just launched this year the first new innovation community. It's called Cultural and Creative Industry. They have a website. It's of course well set up in the first year, and they will run for 7 to 15 years, focusing on cultural and creative sectors and industries. And then in 2026, we will launch number 10. So this will be water, maritime and marine sectors to cover the innovation in this field. Again, align with the key priorities and sectors that the Commission, Parliament, and all our stakeholders are focusing on. Three main objectives for this period is really to boost the innovation capacity of higher education in Europe, so work with all major universities in Europe to make sure they can provide adequate innovation and entrepreneurship courses to their students at master, PhD level. And also we have a dedicated program called Higher Education Initiative, where universities can apply for funding and deploy these programs in their curriculum. Obviously, we also try to cover the entire Europe and increase or improve the capacity, innovation capacity of the countries and regions in Europe that are lagging a bit behind. So we are deploying a large portion actually of the 2.9 billion euro into these in these regions, so mostly Southern, Eastern, Central Europe, with dedicated activities and really supporting the growth of this innovation ecosystem, and then really increasing the impact of our innovation communities across Europe with the funding that is being deployed. So the model, I mean, very briefly, and all this information is also available on our websites. These are, so it's a very decentralized model in a way. Innovation committees are independent legal entity from us and from the European Commission. They have to compete for the initial proposal, the initial call that we launch. They are selected based on excellence and many other criteria. Of course, it's a long-term partnership. They are very autonomous and flexible. They can decide on their own organizational structure and activities. The long-term perspective, I think it's also very beneficial for the partners that are in these innovation communities to receive the funding and focus on activities. Minimum of 7 years and up to 15 years. There's a lot of financial leverage that we try to have. So we provide in the whole of the period of 15 years, 25% of the funding, and partners in these innovation committees mobilize the remaining 75% in the form of co-funding, co-financing of the activities. Again, these organizations such as EIT Digital, Samira works for, it's run by a CEO and a lean management team of CFO, CEO, and then different directors of the main activities. Usually they have physical offices across Europe, 5 to 8 per communities, really result in high impact oriented activities. And the culture is this strong entrepreneurial mindset at national, European, and international level. So really this is the culture change that we try to engage. Here we have a slide on the 10 actually exist. So 9 that are existing communities. So I was describing briefly the journey that EIT has had so far. So we started in 2010 with the first 3, EIT Climate KIC from the top left, EIT Digital, EIT INNOVEIT, focusing each on different societal challenges. And then we went further with launching EIT Health, EIT Raw Materials in 2015, EIT Food 2017, Manufacturing and Mobility in 2019, and very recently this EIT Culture and Creativity. And the last one will be EIT Water in 2026. So they each work independently from each other. Of course, they have been launched at different time, but they also work with each other on cross-KIC activities, such as also these global outreach activities that Samira is leading for Silicon Valley and the US. So just some numbers, and here these are the numbers from last year actually, because I was looking earlier. So almost you can double all these numbers, mostly from the numbers that we got validated in August this year. The main ones, I mean, it's the number of startups that have been supported is close to 6,000. The external funding raised by the supported startup and scale up is close to 6 billion euro. And then the rest is almost 2,000 products launched in the market and services, and a lot of graduates, so almost 5,000 graduates completing EIT programs. The footprint in Europe for EIT, of course, I was mentioning the Israel and Silicon Valley Hub, that's outside this map, but we have, the headquarters of the innovation committees are in red across Europe, and then in some co-location centers where KICs run their activities, and then also the hubs in green that are specifically focusing on this, what we call the regional innovation scheme, so the 10 to 15% of the funding of EIT going to support the development of innovation ecosystems in those regions in Europe that require additional funding. And just to complete the presentation, so these are some of the photos and names of the innovators and entrepreneurs we've been lucky to support and work with over the last 10 plus years. So many of our entrepreneurs and innovators make it to the Forbes 30 under 30 list for Europe. Regularly, it's a quarter or a third of every yearly list comes from EIT community, and also some other lists such as the Global Clean Tech 100 you might be familiar with. Many of our innovators and entrepreneurs supported by EIT are on those lists. There is a slide here also that's also a very small selection of the startup and scale up that we have supported over the years. There are 7 or 8, I think, unicorns nowadays. We supported them very early on in their journey. So EIT Climate Kick, EIT Energy, EIT Digital. I mean, many of our communities have supported these companies that are now very significant in size and revenues and fundraising in Europe. I will finish with that. So EIT is a very large community with many opportunities for all type of innovators. If you're a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a public authority, if you're a university, student researchers, there are lots of opportunities to work with the EIT and one of the innovation committees or several of them. So there is, one entry point is the EIT website. So it's eit.europa.eu, and you can, based on who you are, find what is available in terms of funding, in terms of opportunity, in terms of connecting with other entrepreneurs or investors or funders or enterprise and so on. You can also, in Europe, we have a system where that information on EU funding is disseminated via national contact points. So EIT maintains a network of these national contact points across Europe, and they have all the relevant information on the latest programs, latest opportunity. And again, you can find it on this link. I think this presentation will be made available to you also after the seminar today, so you can refer to it later. And finally, there's also a global page on the EIT website that is called Opportunities, and there you can find really everything that is available on a weekly basis, monthly basis for all of you that are interested to work with us in Europe, but also more globally. As Samira was saying, we have this presence and activities in US and Israel, and then we are looking at other locations to grow in the near future. So I will leave it here, and I think I will pass it back to John Michael. And I wish you, I think, a very good seminar. I think we have 3 good panel coming with excellent speakers from both US, Europe, but also private sector investors, commission. We have some colleagues from the commission, from the different services, and also we have some EIT alumni members that are contributing to the discussion today. So it's going to be a very interesting day today.
Thank you very much, Laurent. I'll go ahead and take over presentation. We really appreciate your content. So, and just a brief, just to point out. So we've had a brief introduction. We'll go into a introduction of the panels and speak a few moments about that. At that point, we'll kick off the first panel in just a few minutes, so about 5 minutes. That'll give us time for some more of our attendees to join us, and we're looking forward to having a really productive discussion about, first, the hype versus the reality. So we have 4 different panels. I'm going to run through them really quickly just so that we can get a picture in our minds as to what the topics are. Panel number 1 is about the hype versus the reality of Web3. Web3, as I mentioned previously, is a somewhat unclear or undefined terminology at this time. There's no absolute definition. Nobody owns, maybe this is typical for what is considered Web3. It's a decentralized definition as much as it is a definition not owned by anyone in particular. People are trying to put their own particular points of view on this. That's fine. The truth is that Web3 will likely define itself as an emergent idea as we move forward. So first panel will be on the hype versus the reality. Second panel, how do we end the hype cycle and get to value? So there are lots and lots and lots of Web3 projects in the world, lots of things claiming to be Web3 projects. That's awesome. But we, at the end of the day, want to be able to create value for people across the globe. So we'll have 4 panelists on panel 2. Panel 3, we'll have 3 panelists. This will be a more significant discussion of ESG impacts. So really looking at how Web3 can contribute to our governance of our planet and our governance of how we interact with each other as communities, countries, etc. And then finally, panel 4 will be about the emergent landscape, and we'll have some interesting discussions here because we have some topics having to do with how art is being affected by Web3. We have some interesting discussions on the regulatory impacts and how some of that may affect art, may affect Web3, may affect the metaverse, may affect all these decentralized technologies. So all of those kinds of topics will come up during the 4th panel. One thing, just as a note to everybody in our audience today, please feel free to use the question panel. There's a question panel associated with GoToWebinar. Please feel free to use the question panel to ask any questions that may come up along the way. I've already seen a couple of different questions along the way, such as, will the presentations be distributed? As Laurent mentioned, they absolutely will. So we'll make sure to cover that. And there's a very interesting question already in the panels about GDPR and data protection and privacy. It's an interesting topic. It is actually something that has been brought up in discussion related to Web3. So we may use that question, our first panel actually, as one of our audience questions. So thank you very much for that question. I think it was from Daniel Verheyen, but we'll come back to that question in just a few moments. So as I mentioned, we'll be kicking off the first panel in just about 3 minutes. So if anyone wants to take a moment to grab your beverage of choice, coffee, water, tea, whatever, feel free to do that while we have a couple minutes before we kick off the first panel. And then, as I mentioned, for this panel, we'll have joining us Thomas, Yoni, Lauren, and Joaquim. And I'll apologize to my panelists if I'm making any mistakes in pronunciation. Try my best, but I'm not necessarily going to get that perfect. I see that just about everybody is ready to go. So we'll, like I said, kick that off in now 2 minutes. So please, Samira, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I saw Joni already coming, and Lauren is just getting out of, she's coming in a few minutes. So if we want to be a little bit patient, so she was in another call, so she's coming.
No, that sounds great, no problem. And we still have about 1 minute before the panel will kick off, and we can always, make life difficult for our existing panelists. As I have not mentioned since we started our session today, we will ask some personal questions just to see if we are working with humans or robots. That seems to be an important question these days. You've heard of deep faking, you don't know. In Web3, it's possible that everybody who's speaking to you right now could actually be just a deep faked persona. I could be, sitting in, I don't know, Antarctica in, one of the stations there, and I could look not like myself at all. But with deep faking technologies, anything is possible. No, I'm kidding. But we'll ask some personal questions. We like to, get involved with everybody.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons we actually want to have those webinars more, right? I think we are focusing more to have more webinars than actually in-person events, even if in-person events, we like them as much as pretty much all people like it, but because it's about Web3 and this is a medium that we actually can get the entire Europe and US actually to connect as well. So anyway, who knows, maybe we are with different devices next year on this event. Maybe we're sitting all in virtual reality, John Michael.
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. I hesitate to wonder. No, it's an interesting, it's also come up a lot. The idea of the metaverse has come up quite a lot, and people are asking all kinds of questions as to what exactly that means. We may, well, I know we are going to ask a little bit about that in our sessions today, but we may hold that as a curiosity question for each of our panelists. Do you believe in the metaverse, and what does that even mean to you? If we were to ask our friends over, well, our good friend Mark Zuckerberg, because he's friends with all of us, and he wants to make sure we're all friends. If we were to ask Mr. Zuckerberg, he would say that Facebook is now Meta and the metaverse. If you were to look at the movie Ready Player One, you'd have a very different point of view. It's a game, and everybody's playing it. If you were to look at Decentraland, they have a different point of view. Minecraft has a different point of view. There's quite a lot of points of view on that. It'll be very interesting to see where get to value is for the metaverse. And I may hold that for our get to value panel, actually. Okay, so just being respectful of our audience's time and everybody else's time, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we kick off. We do have Thomas, Yoni, and Joachim on the line. And if that's okay, Samira, do you want to ask the first question? And
sure.
Yeah, we can go ahead and kick it off. And as far as answering, I'm going to point to, I would suggest that, Samira, that you pick on someone for your first question, and then we'll continue to pick on others as we go.
So Thomas, how about just starting with you? And the first question we have is, what is the most crazy and unreal story you have heard about Web3 so far?
In Web3?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh God. Okay. Well, a good one. Maybe it's not hype. So, could you do doctor consultation in the metaverse and like share medical data like globally? And I thought, okay, there's a bit of a contradiction just in that statement, right? Like, medical data is personal data. You can do remote doctor consultation today without the metaverse, right? And people do that. So, yeah, I thought that was a crazy one, but maybe I'm just behind the times.
What about you, Joachim? What is the craziest thing that you've heard so far of opportunities and tools in the metaverse? And you may be on mute at this moment, Joachim. So.
Good, great. Well, I must say that I come from a specific perspective from perhaps my European hat on, which is very much decentralized. And I hear a lot of very weird and unrealistic stories, probably the most important being that anyone that takes a top-down approach can actually have a meaningful contribution to what we're discussing on Web3. And that can be public players or private players. If you looked at the big techs alone have invested in 2021, $300 billion only to move into the metaverse, to create sort of decentralized applications and platforms and spaces. I think that is complete utopia, because when you take a top-down approach, you will never be able to contribute to a truly decentralized approach. And that is something very, very strict on in Europe, approaching from our perspective on data, on privacy, on identity, actually, and identity management, which is indeed, we do not have all the answers as regards what Web3 is precisely, but we know very well what it is not. It is certainly not an extrapolation from Web 2.0. So I think that, to me, is and remains true science fiction, that anyone who has currently power in Web 2 can leverage that into Web 3. That is not what it's supposed to be.
So what do you think is the best opportunity for European innovation ecosystem in Web 3 generally, Joachim, now that we're talking about Europe? Hi, Laurent, welcome to the panel. Yes.
I must say that we have 2,500 years of history in Europe that is completely decentralized, based on more or less working on compromise and of, in a way, muddling through. And that, to me, is a lot of what we're seeing here today. When you look at the statistics, actually, and Laurent was summarizing that very well also in terms of support, we do not have a shortage of good ideas. We do not have a shortage of companies that can scale up. What we do is we have a certain issue at a certain stage of development as regards the matching of finance with the ideas that are being developed. But that being said, there's a lot of companies that can scale and grow. I think probably the biggest thing that relates to the opportunities and also what we can offer is two things: is education and networking. And education, to me, is the bottom line of all of that, which is why this event and many other events are very meaningful, also to bring people together. And what we do is, in a very democratic way, flag good ideas, try to make people meet on decentralized platforms, try to help them develop their ideas. But that is, I think, as far as probably the public sector should go to. And that at the end of the day also means that whatever we discuss in Web3 needs to have an equivalent in the real world. So it's not only talking about great ideas about all these globally, digitally operating companies, and I've not even spoken about DAOs that probably will form a large part of what we are discussing later today, but it needs to be matched by an infrastructure that also tries to be equally decentralized, equally focused on hubs and nodes that are interconnected. And I think there the EIT is an excellent example of how that could work in practice.
Thank you. I want to ask Laura. I want to say welcome to Valorant again, we started with the first question already, Laura, which was about the most crazy and unreal story you have here. And because you're in a venture capital world and as an investor, you might have heard some crazy things as well. So we would love to hear from you. What is the most crazy and unreal story you have heard about Web3 so far?
And Lauren, you're on mute, so I'm just gonna make sure to unmute you, but you may also need to play around with your audio settings.
Does this work now?
We can hear you now. Yep, perfectly.
Yes, perfect.
This isn't like an absolutely wild story, but something I've heard a lot, especially from the venture community, is companies being funded in the Web3 space, basically to make the founders and investors money, and that's it. So like these pump and dump schemes, you hear a lot about tokens and the token economy and how there's so much promise there. And I've just heard of a lot of stories of companies being, a lot of money being invested into them. And then the idea is for the investors to pump up the valuation and make their money back in spades and then kind of leave everyone else holding the bag. So I'm not going to name any names, but it's just kind of a word of caution when thinking about these companies, because I think the token economy does have a lot of promise. It's just how is this being done and who are the stakeholders and kind of what's the primary motivation behind it.
So that's a really interesting question, and I'm going to give us a tangent question related to that, which is, here we are talking about decentralization as a core tenet of Web3, and even, decentralized autonomous organizations. I'm just curious, do we think that there's an opportunity for a decentralized autonomous organization that becomes, I hate to even say this, but a trust broker? I mean, we talk about trustlessness, but at the same time, how do we create the confidence for the population across the globe that they can engage with the token economy without a trust broker? Can we even do that? I'm just curious. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lauren?
Yeah, so from a venture perspective, we've seen a huge influx of companies working on DAO tooling, so building out the infrastructure for how these DAOs operate. But at the end of the day, it's about what governance mechanisms you're putting in place to make this a workable model. So they don't even have the tooling to figure out how you would kind of operationalize complex governance structures. So I think we're in the very early days. So I'm not going to say it can't happen, because I am a believer in what's happening with Web3 and decentralization, but we're definitely not there yet.
Sure. So we haven't heard from Yoni as yet. I'm just kind of curious, as a founder and somebody who is working in the space, could you add your perspective on the craziness, on some of the topics we just heard about in terms of pump and dumps and the projects and what seems to be working? If you don't mind, Yoni, go ahead and jump in here. And you're on mute as well, so I'm just double checking to make sure that we're not the ones muting you. Okay, go ahead, please.
Right. In my opinion, one of the craziest thing in a positive way has been the huge engagement that the different applications built on top of blockchain has introduced to the space. And as an example, maybe Web3 gaming solution called Axie Infinity that triggered raised a lot of people, like millions from Southeast Asia, to play the game and earn payments, not in application payment, but in cryptocurrencies or tokens. And people really quit their regular jobs just to earn more with this game, and it allowed to get access to incomes that are not possible in their daily jobs in the Southeastern Asia.
So Johnny, it's actually good for our also Europeans and Americans, because you're maybe a little bit about your company. Sorry, just that because you're working very much on getting talents to this environment, right, on Web3. So what are?
Yeah, that's true. So I'm Joni, co-founder of Clearverse. Clearverse is a Web3 talent marketplace. So we are matching companies with different software developers, different designers or product managers to different projects and full-time jobs in the Web3 space, from Web3 startups to DAOs and bigger organizations. Or
Okay, so yeah, I think I don't want to skip the question for John Michael, so I just leave it to you. Sorry, I feel like there are so many questions coming up in my mind. So anyway, I'm getting
No
excited
worries.
about it. Anyway.
No worries. So I mean, maybe another interesting question, since we're trying to get to what is hype and what is reality. I'll throw it out to each of our friends here. What is Web3 to you? So Thomas, if I can ask you to jump in there on your definition of Web3 for a second. You know, I've given what Samira and I've sort of talked about as an idea, you know, a tentpole, but at the same time, I'm curious to see what you have to say.
I'm probably as cynical as Laurent, but let me go down to earth. I'll come down to earth. So I think the driving force behind this, you know, the hype used to be blockchain. It put everything on the blockchain, and then the VC community, you know, couldn't get enough, you know, money out of that. Let's move on to the next metaphor. So the next metaphor is Web3, and so is, you know, yes, we're going through the whole thing again, but I think from the end user perspective, there is a genuine desire for better control of their personal data and the data that's a byproduct of their digital lives, right? So if you look at I love what Tim Berners-Lee said, right? And he pointed to 3 companies, no, you know, names mentioned. That's, what is it? Amazon. What was the other 2?
Google, Amazon, and I think
Amazon,
Microsoft, maybe.
Yeah. So Amazon's a good one. I mean, a byproduct of you know, us shopping on, you know, Amazon for food during COVID is that Amazon knows my diet, right? So, you know, it's good and bad, but I would consider, well, that's probably personal data, right? But then on a more sort of realistic scale, I think there's a rethinking needed that, in fact, you know, people. So our group at MIT, we focus on what is called computational social science, and so we look at, you know, different social networks, everything from the Facebook graph to, you know, there's a student now looking at the amount of propaganda that's going through Twitter, through bots and so on. But what's very clear is that human beings have, in the real life, we have very low numbers of strong social connections, right? So if somebody on Twitter has 1,000 connections, that's just not real, right? In reality, we live in a community, we live in a town, we have family members, and, you know, we need to sort of rethink the internet in terms of this close network of communities, because that's where my interaction sort of really lies. And so that's the value of the data that comes from my local interaction has more worth than what I do online on social media platforms like Twitter, because it's really it's, you know, it's low quality data. And so how do we use this new paradigm for me to control who benefits from my interaction data and byproduct data, right? That's why we have people talk about self-sovereign identity. Now people talk about self-sovereign data. We've been looking at a thing called data trust. I think we use the term data cooperative. So people in my neighborhood could get together as a co-op and pool together our data. We control the data, and we control what algorithms are executed on our data. And whoever is asking, they get the answer, but they never get the raw data, right? So the idea that, you know, my personal data could be sold to companies I've never heard of in China, that's just, it's no longer tolerable.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. What about Joaquin, what is your perspective? What would you say Web3 is today? I mean, you have an interesting sort of bird's eye view of some of these things.
I think it very much aligns to what Thomas has actually said. I truly believe that it's the collective, the community that matters. And that is very interestingly connected to the approach on data that we discussed, where the individual is the owner of the data, grants access, and has a specific identity in different contexts. Now, the interesting thing about what we're discussing here and there, Web3 is very much related to these notions of token economy that, for example, I'm responsible for, which is the term that I would prefer to use. Web3 certainly part of that in a way that has to be properly defined. Metaverse, however you name it, is that at the end of the day, you can choose which communities you would like to be part of. So it's not only restricted to what you see in the real world where you're born in your village or you have your local club or whatever, but according to your preferences for the first time. And this is why this technology, this approach is a complete game changer according to our views, is that you are free to select with whom you engage globally. So at the same time, you have the global opportunity, but actually the meaningful communities that you interact with are small communities that you pick and choose. For example, I am, according to my beliefs, I'm a Prussian monarchist. So basically, I live rather in the 18th or 19th century, which is very difficult to do in the real world at the moment. But this is my belief system where I could, for example, form a DAO-like structure where we have a sort of governance that is similar to the things that I believe in. Now, everyone that is here and out there is part of many communities, and they overlap in part, but they're not identical to everyone. So this is the really free and exciting part of, call it Web3, call it the token universe, whatever you would like to do, that gives you the opportunities. And the opportunities have already been mentioned, not only in the financial, but also in the real economy sphere, in all these contexts, in order to engage in a trust-based, meaningful way. And this is the potential. And there we should not get distracted by, let's say, given the speed of innovation every year, having 3 different titles that are put on this concept. It's the same concept that we have been building for already quite some decades. And it's actually a concept that goes far before we ever talked about digitalization, because it's basically where humanity came from. And this is also one of the aspects that I feel very strongly. The reason why this, what we're discussing here, is so appealing to many people, and also everyone in the gaming space, the young generation, is actually that this really is something that is a core part of our human identity that most people now realize in this strange world that we're living in, and it gets increasingly strange. That gives you a sort of reassurance, a sort of control of your own life and activities that would not be possible without this space. And this is what, in my opinion, is the essence of Web3, or however we name it.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the continuing emphasis on community, because we so quickly thought that we would just suddenly form, a global community when we advance onto the web, and it turns out that the people who are closest to us actually matter quite a bit more. So I love that emphasis. Maybe if I could just jump in with Yoni, what is your perspective on what is Web3 at this moment?
At the moment, I guess Web3 is an umbrella term for any application or interfaces that is built on top of blockchains or any of the existing blockchain protocols. So likes of DeFi and cryptocurrencies, of course, one approach of it, but then there's lots of other applications, and recent discussion about decentralized autonomous organizations also going a bit towards metaverse and Web3 gaming, also NFTs, and then decentralized social media with this kind of community aspect, which very much well tackled too.
Which we already have, right? We already have a lot of things built on the blockchain. That's what you already see, right, in the market as a next web.
Yes, that's of course true. And I think the fundamental thing that the blockchain itself can change is the fact that each property or digital asset can be tied in the single block or a single token in the blockchain. So basically, that allows to create new kind of solutions in the web altogether. And well, recently Web3 umbrella term has been basically connected to blockchain. I think about 5 years ago there was lots of discussion about Web3 being more related to AI and how data can be better filled for the machines to learn from it. And let's see if the Web3 term will change even more when the AR and VR and the metaverse will become even more popular once the applications will start to be created on top of those technologies. But I think we are very much going towards spatial web, which means that the current infrastructure of the internet is not maybe the best one for this type of new applications with AI, blockchain, and maybe VR and metaverse will need in the end to function properly and reach the full potential of it.
I couldn't agree more.
I do have a funny, interesting tangential question that's related to this, which is, and anyone feel free to jump in here on this, but if everything is tracked on blocks in blockchains, and if for the most part blockchains are pretty wildly transparent, especially as it's related to one of our audience questions having to do with GDPR, I just have a curiosity point, when everything's out there, how do we maintain some sense of privacy? And maybe a question is, do we care? I don't know, but I'm curious if anyone has a particularly strong opinion about the privacy aspect of blockchain sort of capturing all of us at all times out there in the world.
So let me answer that one. So together with blockchain, so just people will hate me for saying this, but the design of the EVM, this virtual machine for the nodes of the blockchain, is completely broken. Okay, I'll just say it right now. Why is it broken? Because you need this extra process called the oracle to feed the blockchain with all this data, right? So essentially the network now becomes a silo, right? It's taking in all this data, putting it on the blocks. Like, okay, that was not the purpose of the blockchain, the way it was designed by Stuart Haber back in the 1992 and 93, right? So this is what I'm saying. There's still a long way to go, to work on a proper architecture and design of the nodes of the blockchain, and what data is going to be stored on it. Maybe you end up having a blockchain that just consists of hashes, and all the actual data is off-chain somewhere in a private repository, right? Because, back to what Joachim said, some of this stuff is, and if we love data privacy and if we love GDPR, this data has to be off-chain. It has to be in private repositories. It needs to be decentralized, right? Decentralized, repositories. But anyway, I don't want to hog the channel too much.
So what would you advise, Thomas? This is to stay with you, and then after maybe to Laurent and Joachim and Johnny, and with our, I'd like to just ask the last question on this panel about, and of course, if there is a spontaneously something come up, I think we should just do the question as well. How should a first-time startup founder get started in this space? And then just adding to it, like. What are the areas that we need to really improve to get this? Because I think many people would love to have this to see happening, but we have a lot of challenges, right? This is what we're talking about. So what would be the first time a startup founder, what would you think that they should start with?
And can we start with Lauren on that?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
So on the privacy piece, there are a lot of companies popping up that are taking advantage of zero knowledge proofs, which is a way to maintain your own data, but only share specific pieces of data when it's relevant. So from a venture perspective, we see those getting a lot of funding, but the business model and how it will ultimately be integrated into the ecosystem, that's very much a question mark. So you see people taking very big risks on implementing this quite complex technology, which holds a lot of promise, but it is a big risk for investors to be taking. So that's kind of the piece about privacy. For folks looking to get into Web3, I think that there are two key components that I see as an investor. One is the technical aspects, like, are you building something that's useful, that has a tangible use case, that really adds value to the ecosystem? Are you building a community on top of whatever product you've built? So that's one piece. And then the other piece is the investment ecosystem. So now that we know the economy has taken a bit of a downturn, a lot of the crypto companies that are kind of the hottest deals are maintaining their value at the earliest stages. So they're still getting very high valuations. And oftentimes what we see is that folks kind of know what the hot companies are in the crypto ecosystem. So it's not just kind of a technical community, there's also a cultural community that's very, very vibrant in crypto. You see people kind of traveling to different conferences, a lot of the people know each other. And so being able to infiltrate that community and really getting a sense of the culture and being part of it is incredibly important for getting your company off the ground.
What are the,
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, just staying with Laurent, because so how do you evaluate in Web3 startup as a VC and investor? What kind of criteria are important right now for investors when they invest in a Web3 founder?
Yeah, so I think everyone has their own thesis about what they want to see in the world and what they expect to see in terms of Web3. It is very much a bet. I think, months ago you saw people putting so much money into NFTs, and then you see kind of the price of NFTs drop, and now people are saying build more NFT companies. But you have to take more of a macro view and take a step back. To me, for example, NFTs are an on-ramp to getting people comfortable with crypto and trading kind of digital assets and collectibles and things like that, which may eventually be real world assets where you take your house and are able to trade it or make money off of it in different ways. So you have to kind of take a step back and take that macro view and see how the company fits into your overall thesis about Web3. In terms of founders, we're looking people who are technically adept, and then people who are also involved in the ecosystem and can kind of stay one step ahead. So they know all the companies that are coming out, they're part of these different communities, there's so many Discord threads and things like this. So that's what we're looking for, who could take something from 0 to 1, and in Web3, that's not an understatement of what they have to do. It's definitely a big lift.
Sure, and then so I would like to ask this question about the what would be the advice for the first founders on every panel. So Thomas, are you ready maybe to give answer, and then after that go to Joachim and then Joni to answer this question? So how should a first-time startup founder get started
in Web3?
Yes.
So what I tell a lot of students at MIT, so MIT on average on a normal year would probably be spitting out between 100 to 150 startups, and the thinking is that if 10% of those survive the first 2 years, then that's not bad, and if another 10% of what remains survives 5 years, and then that's not bad, so long as they send checks and endowments, back to MIT, we're happy. But I think understanding how Web2 works is very important, right? The reason why we are able to do all this stuff on Zoom and this, is because the internet, TCP/IP, was designed correctly. There's some design principles underneath that. It's not just random shots in the dark. And the same thing with a lot of the Web2, design. So I think just understanding that, reading a bit of history kind of helps. So that's kind of unusual for me to say that, but if you want to build the right product for Web3, then you better understand how Web2 works.
Thank you. And then Joachim, what is your advice for the first-time founder?
I think as an economic historian, history always works, and it goes quite far back. I think the situation when you found an enterprise, a startup in Web3 is not different than from any other part of the world. You have to get your business case right. you have to have the right skills, and you just simply have to start. And when we talk about digitalization in whatever context, it has to be meaningful digitalization. I, for example, have all my key data on paper, and that remains like this in a specific way. When I'm in favor of digitalization, it doesn't mean everything has to be digitized or everything has to be on a blockchain. It's indeed the discussion on data, what is on a blockchain. Most stuff, nearly all stuff, is not on a blockchain, will never be on the blockchain, because that's not the functionality of a blockchain. It's the credibility aspect, the integrity that is ensured by the blockchain, but not that the data is there. So when you go to this space, make sure that you don't just copy anything that you see, but you have to have a use case that is important for the real economy. We made a pledge in Europe at the European Commission in 2016 publicly that for us, blockchain is a breakthrough technology, 1 out of 4 breakthrough technologies on which we focus in the next decades all our innovation activities, and that in all policy fields. And we didn't do that because we like cryptocurrency so much, but because we see the applications in the real world. And since then, we have been discussing a lot about use cases. So when you found an enterprise, you need to know to whom you are selling your products. What is the use case for citizens? What is the use case for small enterprises? 99% of enterprises are the small enterprises. What is it what you are doing? And then you need to have the right skill set, which is very difficult, because at the end of the day, blockchain, in my opinion, is extremely easy to understand. Nothing easier than knowing what a ledger is and just digitize it, and there you are. But then come all the details about in which context and what other tools do you use and how do you combine that? What about the cybersecurity aspects? What about everyone who is involved in the process, data storage, all the legislative issues, regulation in so many different countries on a global scale that you need to understand? Not easy. So get that education right. And finally, just start somewhere, which is probably the most important piece of advice from my side. And we see it where the innovation comes from. The innovation comes from the gaming space, 3 billion gamers worldwide. And the largest percentage of whatever we see in Web3 everywhere is scaling up in these small, playful contexts where then it's being developed, it is being used. And that is something that applies at every level, even when we come to big things like looking at CBDCs, stable coins, whoever designs that stuff. You need to start somewhere to realize where are the practical issues, what can I do without that, what about standardization, the interfaces, what are the myriad of small things. But at the end of the day, when I talk to investors, when I'm at pitching events, when I see pitches, I can, in 90% of the cases, I immediately see that it's crap. And why is it crap? Because people are not able within 1 minute to clearly tell what difference they make and what their use case is. And if you have already resolved that issue, you are in a far advanced position to do basically whatever you want, because I think the money is out there, the matching is possible, but people just want to have a convincing story and then develop that piece for piece and not just have someone guessing, oh, I copy NFTs because I saw someone else making big money out of that. That is
Sure, that we have seen a lot of that, of course. I think we all have seen that. So because it was so hype, that's so true. Joni, what do you see in the market as you're dealing with a lot of Web3 founders actually, that they're looking desperately for talent? Do we have Joni still?
Yeah, I think he's muted.
Oh, okay.
All right, I think I'm audible now.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, since I'm myself first-time founder, and if I have that great advices, but if I share my own thinking of how to enter the space, and of course seeing lots of new ventures coming in the Web3 space almost daily basis, I would say that, and also agree with the other panelists of that you really need to understand what you're building, and I believe that just building a solution from Web2 to Web3, let's say you're building a Web3 LinkedIn, or if you're building Web3 Airbnb or this kind of solutions, you really need to think about what is the unique angle that this service would benefit of using and leveraging blockchain in the first place. And
comparing to Web2.
It is, yeah, compared to Web2, because Web2 companies and the tech stack with Web2 operates, it is far more flexible in a sense that the blockchain itself is, and that provides a huge benefit from the Web2 companies to take off the prospecting or rising Web3 ventures if there's any coming into their domain. So that is likely something that I would think if finding a Web3 startup at the moment.
Thank you. So John Michael, do we want to open it for the people, attendees to have questions, or do you want to ask any other question? Go ahead,
Well,
John.
I've been keeping, just as a heads up for everybody, I've been keeping track of the questions off to the side that the attendees have asked. So we've already knocked out one of the questions having to do with perspectives on GDPR and some of the privacy challenges. But I also want to, ask a couple of questions that are more personal questions. So the top of the list is, what do you want to be remembered for? And I just want to throw that to to Thomas to start with, and we'll work our way around our panel. What do you want to be remembered for? Open question. You can say whatever you want. Has nothing to do with Web3.
Hey, the reason I'm not an academic. I'm an unusual person at MIT. The reason I've hung around MIT for so long is because on the walls of MIT it is written there, solve society's difficult questions, right? It's not to create Facebook, okay? Just make that clear. Just to pick again on our beloved friend Facebook. So I would like to be remembered as at least somebody that's contribute positively to solving some, maybe small social problem, not a big social problem. Let's just do, small social problems.
That's very interesting. Okay, so what about you, Lauren? What do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, quite a lofty question, but I guess something that I've been working towards is how to build a better internet, and particularly the social web. So I started my career as a quantitative social scientist. Thomas mentioned that field earlier today, and then have been working in different roles to try and improve the state of the social web. So moving into venture, now I'm able to invest in companies that are kind of addressing that goal from the outside in, rather than working at the big platforms. I've been at Google and Facebook as well. So that's the hope.
Very fair, very fair. What about yourself, Yoni? What do you want to be remembered for?
With our current solution, of course, defining what on-chain reputation means and bring the unique angle for that, be it utilizing zero-knowledge tooling very well, that defines that era when zero-knowledge was introduced to the blockchain industry, and on-chain reputation tools.
And last but not least, Joaquin, what do you want to be remembered for?
I'm happy that you asked me last, because I'm spoiling the party. I thought about that a lot, but I don't want to be remembered. I mean, probably I take a too long-term perspective, but if you're a normal person, you're remembered for a couple of decades. If you're on this panel, probably you're famous enough to be remembered a couple of centuries, hopefully. If you're Jesus, a couple of millennia. That's not too long in human history, or in history at all. I think, and that brings me back to a more serious part, and as an economist, having seen 200 years of misguided economic theory, always putting these utility maximizing individuals and profit maximizing companies in the foreground, which is completely wrong. As we said before, an individual, in my opinion, only matters as part of a community, and that can be different communities. So what I would like to do is just help communities that are close to my heart in terms of preferences, in terms of activities, to get together to improve a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's what the community does. It's not what I do. And I don't know if that is representative for some percentage of humanity, but I can assure you, once you have that philosophy, you are extremely at ease with everything that happens on this planet, because at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about really the space that you're trying to develop.
So Sam, Samira, I'm going to ask you the same question. I know you have opinions, so you're up.
Yeah, I mean, after Joachim giving such a philosophical answer, I think I just I love that. I mean, I'm also very interested in that kind of feeling. Like, I think it's just, I would say, enjoying this world in a maximum way, and just trying to not harm it. and just leave it for the others to come and join as much as we are joining it. I think that's what is my purpose in this life, I think. And I think many of us are in this call, and also including the attendees, we are actually very blessed with having so much access to this bubble that we are living in. And there are so many of our humanity that they're struggling with some basic needs in this world. And I think part of the reason that this Web3 is so hype is looking just from democratic view, how many percent of our human being in this world actually do know and have taste democratic world. So if you just think from that perspective, it's such a small bubble, right? And that's why I also believe so much in uniting with democratic countries, because I think this is the way, hopefully we can, make more humans and give it access to more humans to taste this democratic world, because this is nothing better than being free as a human.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, I'm going to take us okay, now that we've heard what you want to be remembered for, I want your definitions of greatness. What is greatness to you? And I'm going to start with Lauren just for the fun of it. What is greatness to you, Lauren? How do you define it?
Lofty question.
This is the James Lipton inside the expert studio question.
These are the surprise ones. And then I would like to, by the way, before Lauren gives the answer, I would like to ask the audience to ask questions they have put them please down that we can ask your questions. And maybe if you have to a specific person, just mention that as well in your question. Thank you.
And just so you know, Sam, I do have them up on my screen. So yeah, absolutely, to everyone in the audience, please post questions to the question panel. We won't be able to take every single question, but we'll do our best to try and grab what we can as we move along the way. Sorry to interrupt you, Lauren. So please go ahead.
Oh, no worries. It's simple. For me, it's being able to live your values is greatness.
Awesome. Awesome. Yoni, what is greatness to you?
I think greatness means that the society as a whole shares a common opinion if someone is remembered to be a great in some domain, be it being a great nation leader or being great sportsman or being a great entrepreneur.
Awesome. Awesome.
And I think it always tends to be objective values, or people very much share that this person was or is great in this domain, but that applies only for the very best, let's say top 10 in the category.
No, that sounds awesome. Thank you very much. Joachim, what is greatness to you? And you have you're going to get a very short answer. You have 1 minute. Same with you, Thomas, just so you know.
30 seconds. I said as a public servant, what one of the Prussian kings said, the public servant has to obey the king and the nation. If the two disagree, he follows the nation, which means that whatever the big boss is saying, when it's according to our values, when it's good for the community, that has precedence before everything that is very much important up there. And that is what I think also Laurent said it. Walk the talk, believe in your values, are yourself. And that's why I am actually in this space, because I hate all these autocratic structures that tell other people what to do. And that is what I think blockchain and only blockchain can change.
Awesome. And Thomas, you have the last words.
Actually, almost same as Lauren. Always struggling for your ideals, right? There's always challenges, but never giving up on, trying to, aim for your ideals, values.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, I just want to thank Yoni, Joachim, Thomas, and Lauren for participating in our first panel of the day, discussing the hype and the reality. This has been very interesting and instructive, so really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and jump forward to our next panel. Please feel free, everybody, to hang around and enjoy what comes next. Our next session is going to be inclusive of Felipe, Jan, Adrian, and Thomas. And I'm sorry, Felipe, I just noticed that I made a small error in spelling your first name. So I'm actually going to take a second and correct it while we're
So
on
John
the
Michael,
fly here.
I want to just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to make some small comment on our panelists that they were already on a panel. So if you don't want to be on a screen, just turn your screen off and you would still hear the panel. And then we would give the, screen to the 4 new panelists that they're coming up. Yeah, and then you can still stay with us and listen to us. Thank you. And yeah, welcome everyone. I think, JM, some of the questions we have to, I will appreciate with this panel that we do get to the questions, so that we have definitely some time for questions, because I see there are a lot of questions actually coming up as well. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm keeping a watch on it. But yeah, so our second panel today is going to be about getting to value. So how do we move from the hype cycle? The hype cycle, what is the hype cycle? A lot of people have talked about this, but the hype cycle is kind of the noise that we all hear out there in the world describing how amazing something is. If I were to tell you how long I've been paying attention to the word metaverse, it wasn't originally called that, but paying attention to the metaverse, it goes back to like 1995, and I'm dating myself a little bit here, but it's a really old concept, and we keep coming back to it over and over again. We heard about it when we talked about Second Life. We're now hearing about it from Meta, Decentraland, from Axie Infinity and more. There are many different definitions, but it's still hype because we're still trying to figure out what the value is. So this panel is really about that. It's about trying to get to value.
Right,
as
and
I
that's
mentioned,
why.
Go ahead, Sam.
Sorry. And that's why we're going to start with the first question. And I was not intended to break you, John Michael. I don't know if you want to finish the sentence.
No,
and yeah, that's why we're going to start with the first question, which is actually, I would like to start maybe with Yun. Hi, welcome to our panel. So maybe a little bit actually, could you guys just say one sentence just about what you do, and because that will be very helping for our audience, that they don't have to go find you on LinkedIn. So just one sentence of what you do, and then the question what I have for you, Jan, is what are the most valuable Web3 projects today that are operating commercially, and what have you heard about?
Okay, well, first of all, good morning or good evening, depending on which time zone you're in. I'm a professor at Stanford. I care typically about digital health, and I care about reconciling privacy on the one hand with large-scale compute and analytics, for example, by public health agencies or governments. In terms of what is valuable in Web3 right now, leaving aside the whole question of what Web3 actually is or what the metaverse is, because there's a lot of debate about that, the only thing I really see is infrastructure. So these are things like Infura or other companies that basically help projects access decentralized systems. Many of those are revenue generating and have been quite stable. And I haven't seen anything else that's worth noting.
How about you, Thomas? Maybe a little bit introduction about yourself, and I know you have been involved also in transatlantic AI, artificial intelligence, and maybe a little bit explain about the work that you do, and the question, what most valuable Web3 projects you have seen so much commercially operating.
Yeah, so thanks for having me as a speaker in this really interesting session. My name is Thomas. I'm here in Silicon Valley, and I work for Intel. And within Intel, I am within a group working on innovation, the data center AI innovation group. At the same time, around 2 years ago, I founded a platform that Samira was just mentioning. It's called the Transatlantic AI Exchange, and we do monthly session to talk about topics around innovation, startups, and technology, including Web 3.0, AI, and others. So I'm encouraging everybody to check it out and participate. We have now over 5,500 attendees over the last 20 sessions we put together. So putting that aside for a second, a lot of things have already been, I think, answered in the previous conversation. I personally would say in regards to Web 3.0, there is still a lot of potential and focus around crypto in general. And I recently got exposed quite a bit around the topics of the metaverse. Now, both of them, I believe, are still somewhat in the hype cycle. And I'm aging myself as well now, I have to admit. I was in the metaverse, or whatever you want to call it. I called it Second Life 20 years ago. Very active, which today we would call it the metaverse. It was totally overhyped. It had a huge user base, and then it crashed and burned afterwards. And I truly believe that if Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't have renamed Facebook to Meta, we wouldn't be all over the metaverse and the hype that we just created, because it has been around for a while, the virtual world. However, I actually believe there is potential, and we see that very slowly, that either in the crypto world, financial institutions are now taking this a little bit more serious moving forward. And I may get back to that with another question that I assume will come up. And the second one is the same with the metaverse. I still believe it's somewhat hyped. I do believe that the adoption of the metaverse or the usage of the metaverse is still in question. But I think ultimately it comes down to one thing, and that is whoever figures out, with whatever technology we are talking about, that there is value creation around certain specific use cases. Whatever it may be, it will be successful. The question is, where is the use case? Where's the problem we are trying to solve? And how are we going to implement it? And I leave it with that for now.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Adrian, I think I like to start with you and then go to Felipe. Felipe is a founder, so and he works with a lot of founders, but you too, Adrian, because you represent EIT Manufacturing, which so you guys work with a lot of founders as well. So please tell us, what do you see?
So first, just a small introduction. Also, it's thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm from EIT Manufacturing, so one of the, let's say, innovation communities the EIT is building up. We are pretty new to the game. Actually, we're just 2 years old, 3 years old now. Actually, so we're just also, let's say, in our beginning phase, and I'm part of it 2 years already. And I'm working as a project manager also on the main topic of artificial intelligence, so road mapping, checking what's going on in Europe, what is the roadmap staging on, what are the new, let's say, things coming up, in which direction we have to push actually. And in that case, related to the question, what I see with, let's say, the goggle of the manufacturing side I would say that the monetarization of data is one of the possibilities I see in Web 3.3, because for now everybody is reluctant to share the data. Everybody wants to keep it for themselves. But let's say with the blockchain approach and everything, you have the possibility to lock the data in a way so that everybody can use it. You get paid for it, and you're not losing the knowledge. Yeah, so you're just, let's say, helping everybody else to get the innovation running, or get the system running better and more smoothly, especially in AI systems where you need a lot of data to train. This is a real bond what I see, and where I see also value that we can have here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I think in data space, that's one of the first spaces we have been starting. And I think that's why security becomes so important, right? And how we can secure those data. So Felipe, how about you? You're a founder, you work with a lot of founders. So welcome again. Maybe a little bit about yourself, and then yes, what do you see as a valuable Web3 projects today that are commercially active?
Yes, hello, thank you for the invite. And yes, you're totally true. So I'm coming, I think, from a different background. So for me, Web3 is mostly blockchain and crypto. That's number one. Also being a founder and working, and my expertise being mainly in consumer products. And in this case, what I'm building is called Talent Protocol. And it's basically a Web3 community and platform for high potential talent. And what we try to do is imagine if LinkedIn was an open database, and picking up what Adrian was talking about open data. So, but yeah, so a much more interoperable and open resume with kind of more verified credentials, and also then an incentive system to make sure that this data is verified and updated, and that other people can use it and build on top of it. Regarding your question in terms of value, I think there's just two things I would like to say very quickly in the beginning, which of course are my perspective. The first one is that we're still, although we've been talking about blockchain and Web3 for the past decade, I think we're still pretty early. So it's all, sometimes it's hard to compare the stage of this industry with other ones in terms of value creation. So for example, email and the internet wasn't nearly as valuable as they are today in the early 90s. So that's kind of one point. And the other one is also how do you define value in your question? So most people will look at it and think about what's the biggest project, the one with the biggest market valuation. So basically the ones that are capturing the most value. But I think the most interesting thought process is thinking of the ones that are creating more value to others. And I think kind of the first examples that came to mind, first of all, is one project that's probably not known by anyone here. It's called Impact Markets, and they are already giving like some sort of universal basic income to, I think more than or around 20,000 people in the world. So the using crypto Impact Market. So that's kind of one real use case of almost 20,000 people in the world getting universal basic income every month. That's one. I think even if we think about the most popular cases like OpenSea and the NFT marketplaces, although there's a lot of speculation associated with it, there's also a lot of creatives and creators that got a lot of value for and much more value for their art that they were receiving before. And also I think there's some interesting early use cases in terms of getting some kind of the basic banking services to people, to unbanked people in Africa and Latin America. A lot of people in Latin America, for example, a wallet called Valora is very used for international transfers. So for example, just mothers sending money to their sons like studying abroad and sending it through this kind of crypto wallet makes it instantaneous and also without any fees. But yeah, so just kind of some quick examples that come to mind, and with that caveat that I think we're still pretty early, so I think it's much more interesting to identify areas where there's potential to create a lot of value and not trying to compare it kind of side by side.
It's very interesting to see that there are actually more people that they really also thinking from the impact perspective, that they are so much interested in this bubble that we are discussing today.
Usually those examples don't make the news. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So, John Michael, should we go to the second question, or what do you think?
I have a derivative question that relates to some of the things that were just said, and it kind of relates to impact. What I liked about that was that there's this connection between what is this abstract concept of Web3 to something tangible that affects people directly. And so I'm sort of curious on that, you know, in terms of connecting the physical world to this digital abstract concept. You know, what are some interesting things that different of us have seen in terms of that kind of a connection, where you take maybe it's an NFT, maybe it's impact markets, who knows? But if we look at you know, putting Web3 into the physical world, making those connections, whether it's IoT or robots or anything, what does that look like, and what is an interesting thing that you may have heard about? I'd throw that question first to Jan and to see, you know, what comes to mind, if anything.
Well, okay, well, that's also like a big topic area.
It is.
Despite my initial sort of negativity about sort of which projects are most valuable in the space, I do have very strong positive opinions about the benefits of lowering barriers to entry to custom engineered financial systems. And if you think about central currencies like the US dollar or the euro, typically like why governments like them is because it allows them to articulate a sort of financial policy. they're able to use the euro or US dollar for particular goals. This can be dealing with trade imbalances or as part of other strategies. And the main lesson there is that currencies are very closely connected to particular goals that groups of people have. And what I really love about decentralized systems or crypto economic systems is the fact that groups of people anywhere on Earth who have common interests or common goals can come together and build an economic system around a particular set of new goals. Those can be things like inclusion or sharing or education or climate or universal health care or whatever else it is. So I'm certainly very, very positive on things like purpose engineered crypto economic systems that allow people to reach particular goals. I have to say, in terms of projects or efforts that get real grassroots traction and that really organically grow, I've unfortunately seen very few of those, although a variety of large companies and governments and NGOs and others are all still experimenting. In terms of things like Web3 and metaverse, the notions relating to metaverse are not directly connected to blockchains in any simple way. Those are really like two entirely separate things. And in terms of these efforts getting traction, real organic growth, taking over the world or whatever you want to call it, the big practical issue I see is that building decentralized systems always comes at an expense for user experience or cost. It's always easier to have a central database somewhere. It's always faster to have a central database somewhere. It's always easier to secure a centralized database. And so the fundamental problem from like a founder perspective or like getting market traction perspective or all these things is decentralized systems really only work for situations where there is an extreme benefit to decentralizing things. So you need situations where countries are fighting, where there's no common court, where there's no ready access to police or anything like that. So in those settings where there is an extreme benefit to decentralization, it makes sense to take the hit in terms of system performance or user experience and things like that. And so it's that combination of difficulties that I think is part of the reason why we haven't seen sort of breakout global decentralized things except for DeFi. And part of that is related to the mere fact that the technology was invented to eliminate central banks, which is Bitcoin. So it's not surprising that the main like runaway success use case is decentralized finance. So that's just a first stab, but clearly there's a lot more to it, but I'll stop here.
Fair enough. And, it's just a brief anecdote for half a second here. I always loved Clayton Christensen's book about the innovator's dilemma. One of the things that was the thesis was that oftentimes new ideas, new technologies have to find a hyper niche in order to get off the ground. And once a hyper niche has been established and has become effective, where user experience improves and all these things start to improve, then that hyper niche starts to eat away at the more mainstream ideas. I think that may be applicable here. I'm not 100% sure though. But I want to toss it over before we go too much further. I want to toss it over to Adrian, especially since manufacturing has such a physicality to it. I'm curious about your perspective on, Web3 impacting the physical world as it relates to manufacturing.
Well, as I stated, it's mostly that you have this security aspect on the data. I think this is the main aspect we have here with in regards to Web3. Yeah? And as Jan stated, we have a little bit of this. You have to create this You have always the risk, and you have the money you have to include if you're starting anything in related to collecting data, or let's say trying to build on that. And this always takes time and effort. And the question you get from a management perspective is always, where's the ROE? So where's the return of investment I get? And this is something you cannot really process, because if you're really thinking in that direction, where's the return of invest? Sometimes you're missing the real point in that. Yeah. So sometimes you're looking for the wrong things to do and the wrong actions to take. So actually you have to take a step back and say, okay, what are the possibilities? What do I see? And what can I make out of it? And then you're getting this more that you need actually to make the breakthrough. And I think when you're talking about blockchain and Bitcoin, so let's say technology enabler, I think this really happened in the end, but now we have to see how we push it into other sectors, because for, let's say, the DeFi sector, we all know it's a cryptocurrencies, it's the big sector for Web3 in itself, but now it's evolving into manufacturing actually. We have a lot of digital twins coming in, robotics, autonomous systems in itself, artificial intelligence. This is being, let's say, implemented one after another. But what I see, what we have always a problem is the S5. The first implementation is working fine and everything is okay, but then if you're going into the use phase, the people are not believing what happens, yes, so, or they're not trusting the system, and then you have this trust issues, and then the people are not using the system correctly, and you have to teach them, you have to train them, and there is a little bit of a mismatch of speed we get, because we are implementing really fast, really high technology stuff, and sometimes we have personnel that uses it then, which is not trained for this, and this is the mismatch we have right now, and that's where we are also missing impact and value actually, and that's where we're losing a little bit on the traction.
Awesome. No, thank you for that perspective. Thomas, would you have some thoughts?
Yes, I do. And first, I would agree with everything that was just said, but I want to piggyback on what Jan just said earlier, and I totally agree what he said. It's a complex situation. The first one is, if you look at the invention of the internet and the topic that we are discussing here, and you overlap the adoption curve of innovation, I would say we are today where the internet was when we discussed this in 1998, something like that. We are just at the beginning of what we are trying to figure out, and we don't know how the future will look like. We did not know in 1998 how we are using the internet and what we are going to do with all the websites we had and services 5, 6, 7, 10 years later. So we still don't know, and we don't have a glass ball, but we have a lot of history, in my opinion, to analyze and learn from it and then move forward. So the first thing is, we definitely should look into how this all started with the whole crypto and blockchains. And I would say, if we are just starting a race, we didn't start in a very good race at all, because the valuation of the cryptos and the blockchain valuations is a complete roller coaster. And I think the biggest effect is not even on the financial community, is on the overall perception of trust. And trust and transparency is something that needs to be fixed, or at least more being evaluated, so that people are trusting what is happening here with Web 3.0, and then put services on top of it. At the flip side, if you look what happened last week, where traditional banks actually finally completed a DeFi trade on a public blockchain, that's a huge, big deal. If you looked at somebody like, who was it, JP Morgan successfully tokenized Singaporean dollars and Japanese yens, I think that would have been unthinkable 2-3 years ago on the financial side. And then you have Goldman Sachs, who is currently standardizing cryptocurrencies data for institutional investors. Could you have imagined that 5-6 years ago? Absolutely not. So as much as there is a trust issue on the cryptocurrencies in general, I think finally, at least the big corporations are seeing the value. And that's why I like what Jan just said earlier. If on a global basis, on a macro level, there is a competitive situation that's being created, you know, cryptocurrencies and trading versus conventional banking, let them play it out. We can only win. We as consumers can only win. Ultimately, I do believe in the decentralization of our data and the content. And I think it is absolutely the right time to revisit what we have allowed, what was developed over the last 10 to 15 years, which is we have 7 big hyperscalers on the planet who are controlling massive amount of data in a centralized manner. The value creation out of that goes into mostly their pockets, not all of it, but we as the owner of our own data, we would like to get some value back in whatever form and shape, you know, being it money, being it something else. And I think that desire will hopefully kickstart the next movement of Web 3.0. Similar examples is with the metaverse. I like to give this example of what COVID has done for the world. It may sound crazy, but I passionately was trying to convince the world to adopt desktop video conferencing 21 years ago. And guess what? It took, in my opinion, COVID globally, unfortunately, to do something that what we are doing here right now. We could have done this 15 years ago. The technology was there. We needed a push to rethink what we can do in our own world and environment to do it better, more effective, more cost efficient. And this is what we are doing here with this video session, for example. So metaverse has been around for a long time. I am personally somewhat skeptical because I've been here before twice. However, as I'm looking into the metaverse and the decentralization of, you know, building your own environments, and if I look at companies like Starbucks, or if I look at other brands like McDonald's, or the high fashion industry, who are all currently building virtual worlds within the metaverse, and I looked at these and experienced it a little bit, I think there is an interesting use case to be made where the digital world is finally acceptable for us in our mindset to be used differently than before COVID. But it takes a few more years to extend the video conferencing that we are now doing without any question, and extending this digital environment and use cases beyond video conferencing, like the metaverse.
I saw Philippe.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, sorry, I saw Philippe's hat a couple of times, so I want to see. I want to make sure that you guys just feel free to respond on each other's, talk as well, because that makes it very interactive. So, Felipe, do you have anything to add on that? What Thomas said.
I mean, I think I have a lot to add, and I think this conversation could last the entire
forever
day or afternoon. Because I mean, I don't even remember how it started. What was the question that John asked?
It doesn't matter, though. We go with the flow.
Yeah, go ahead and riff on whatever your thoughts are, Felipe.
Yes.
A lot of things. I think I remember kind of your question, kind of that intersection between kind of the digital and Web3 and the real world. And from this is almost like on like a side note now, but from a consumer perspective, what I've seen that it's been more interesting, still kind of very basic and early on, but it's mainly kind of ticketing and kind of token gating and access to stuff. So if you hold some sort of asset, being like an NFT that represents membership or some sort of tokens that will give you access to something in the real world, that can be like a co-working space, an event, a party, whatever. And I think those have been the most interesting examples that I've seen. Also with kind of NFC tags, both on clothes and other products that also kind of link to that. So you can also show some sort of ownership, or that you own some sort of assets, and showing it with a physical object without the need of kind of actually connecting a wallet or something like that. But that's, I think, some of the interesting examples I've seen. I mean, regarding the other topics, I mean, I've heard so many different ones that mostly I agree with everyone. I don't know, maybe John, you want to kind of refocus with the question, and then I'll start diverging again.
Well, it really was about the intersection of physicality, but I think, you actually came up with one of the best and interesting examples just to start with, which was about the impact market and the way that that's enabling, people to the unbanked or others to be able to participate more effectively in the economies that are around them. So I think that's really interesting. But I also, there's actually an audience question that I think is particularly interesting to sort of dig at, and I would love to ask your perspective on this. We talk about get to value, but the question from the audience is, well, who shares our value? So what does value even mean? Value for somebody in Georgia or in Indonesia may not mean the same as value means in the UK, the United States, or Mexico. So I'm just kind of curious, when you think about Web3 as it relates to values, do you have any opinions about that? It's so amorphous though. But how do value collectives even take place? How does that work?
Yeah,
do you have any ideas?
But I can try to refund on that, especially when you mention Web3 and value in the same sentence. Everyone thinks about money. That's kind of the first thing that everyone thinks. So yeah, what's the new way to make money today? And when I think about value, and maybe that's something that we need to learn in the space, is that, and as founders, I'm speaking as founders, it's very tempting to start from like all of these technical innovations that exist. So we can, all of the possibilities of what we can build. But to get to value, I think we need to start from a real world problem. And that's, I think, a good kind of global definition of value. So solving a real world problem. And of course, in different parts of the world, problems will be different. And for some people, problems is getting food on their table. For others, is buying ugly JPEGs for millions of dollars. Different problems. But I think that's, and I know a lot of founders in the space, and sometimes there's a lot of people start from that need. I want to do something interesting technologically. I want to use this new technology, and then they struggle to find what problem are they solving. So by solving a problem first, and sometimes the best solution is not Web3, is not neither of these technology. Maybe it's using other kinds of technology. And also we talk a lot about kind of metaverse and digital and all of that. And sometimes people, to find these real world problems, mean that you need to be in the real world also, and kind of talking to people and understand what their needs are. I do believe that there are a lot of problems. And I don't know who mentioned it, but this idea, I think it was Jan, this idea that decentralization has a lot of drawbacks, and of course a lot of people in the world, those drawbacks have less impact, so they're much more willing to kind of to accept those drawbacks because they will have a lot more advantages. But yeah, understanding who are the people that Web3 blockchain can help nowadays in the state, and with the infrastructure that we have, with the friction and the barriers to adoption that we have, who are the people that we can actually help in the short and medium term. And maybe we should focus our attention more there, and then use those examples to kind of to scale into other countries. And I think what's interesting here is, like we were saying, it's maybe the innovation should go where the money isn't. So the innovation should start in not the traditional places, and then to prove that you can actually add value, and then scale to the other places. And maybe this will be a way to kind of start to balance some of the, then bring more equality.
Can I add to that, John, Michelle?
Go ahead. Please, Thomas.
So I agree, but I may have a slightly different emphasis on the money side. I totally agree. As a business person, everything somewhat is always around money. But, and I don't want to put this into a philosophical conversation kind of a thing, but I think it's important for me to convey the opinion that I would rephrase the focus on money, and I would ask the question for everybody, what's in it for me? And me is not necessarily the individual, like me, Thomas. if I deal with startups, if I deal with customers, if I work at Intel with the developer community and startups and the hyperscalers and customers, I always encourage people as a good sales business person to ask the question, what's in it for me, by what's in it for them, for each individual. If you have an identified problem that you can solve with Web3, and you can at the same time answer the question, what's in it for me, what's in it for them, from each individual's point of view, you have a winning proposition. And I truly believe that we have not really answered that question for all the parties involved, what's exactly in it for them. It still sounds very one-sided. Like, you know, in the previous session, the investor, the VC said, yeah, you know, around metaverse or something, what's in it for me was primarily the investor community is trying to make a big buck, short-term thinking. It's not long-term thinking. So we need to really ask the question, what's in it for everybody equally at the same time? And that's why I'm a huge fan of Web3, because the key thing for me is the decentralization of the power in itself. We individually, I get totally frustrated that my data sits somewhere in the cloud. Facebook is using it, Google is using it, everybody's using it, and they're making money off it. I'm not getting a dime for it. I would love to have a decentralized environment where I can control what's happening with my data, and I can control what I'm getting for it, and I can control whom I'm giving it to. And these things, I think that can be addressed with a proper implementation of Web 3.0 in general.
It's very fair. It's very fair. Jan, you looked like you were about to say something as well.
Oh, well, so I agree with everything that was said, but I've made so many lessons the hard way, where I think something is interesting or valuable or needs to be done or is useful, but typically I struggle with getting many other people to agree with me. And one example would be this intersection of data and privacy and compute and monetizing data. Generally, I ask audiences, like, raise your hand if you think privacy is good. And, you know, 1,000 hands go up. And then I say, raise your hand if you use Gmail, and 1,000 hands go up. And in that instance, 1,000 people have articulated that they value their privacy at approximately 50 cents a month. Because if they really cared about their privacy, they wouldn't be using Gmail, they'd be using Proton Mail or whatever. So what this means is that I can jump up and down and run around and say privacy matters, monetizing data, da 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 da. But then when I ask audiences, like, okay, so how are you executing on your privacy preferences? The answer is we're not. And if you give me a free piece of pizza, you can have everything. So where I struggle in this sort of privacy data space is simple user preferences. And I also struggle with articulating benefits of things like privacy preserving analytics to companies. And one interesting thing I've learned is that for many companies, data are only valuable if their competitors don't have the data. Because if everyone has the same data, everyone can train on the same stuff, so there's no differential advantage. So that would be an example where if I talk to like a social networking company, which are, as you know, all advertising companies to first approximation, if I talk to them, they don't care about data that their competitors have access to. And so that, you know, directly conflicts with this notion of let's have a decentralized repository of information that everyone can compute on and have pass-through payments to individuals. The ray of hopes are places like the European Union and places like Germany, where when I run into people on the street and have a conversation about privacy, they'll ask me hard questions like, what is your company doing with my data? What happens if you get hacked? But it's very rare for me to run into quote unquote normal people on the street that ask me hard questions about privacy, data, computing, value. And so part of what we need is like a much broader conversation along the lines that you started, Thomas. Like, how does the internet work right now? Like, what's actually going on? Are you comfortable with this? Are you willing to do something about, you know, your perception about how it'd be better to do this? So part of what we're struggling with, I think, when we talk about like limited adoption or finding use cases, is that for the billions of people who are not on this panel right now, who do not live in Silicon Valley or whatever, we need to be much better at communicating a few things.
Okay, I would like to add just two things actually, because what you said about us at Europe, or let's say competitors not wanting to share the data, this is totally true, because I have so many startups. They're doing the same thing for the same product, for the same machine again and again, because the competitors don't share the data. So they have to retrain on the same data, the same system again and again. And this is just, let's say, taking time. It's just so crazy. And what I wanted to add is that sometimes it's maybe not the money, but the user experience that wins. And the problem we have in privacy, always the user experience is a little bit worse than the, let's say, the ones that when you share your data. It's always easier. And even in Germany, or let's say in Europe, we have the AI Act coming up, we have the Data Act coming up. So there will be a lot of regulations again coming in, which make it harder, or let's say not that easy to get all the data, or to collect everything. But in the end, there will be one easy click to allow everything, because this is what happens right now. And if you enhance the user experience for whatever you do, you will get a better audience here. But how do you enhance the user experience for a more private life, or more private sector? I think this is the question we have, and that's why everybody is using Gmail, because it's easy. Yeah, because you don't have to think about it, or to okay, is it private or not private? Everybody else is using it, so I'm using it also.
Okay, John Michael, should we have 5 minutes left, right? Or how?
Yeah,
No?
less than that actually. So we're about to move into lightning rounds, guys. So you don't have a lot, you have like 30 seconds to answer 2 specific personal questions each.
Yeah.
And so these personal questions are, and I'll start with Adrian, what is it that you want to be remembered for in under 30 seconds? Very broad question.
A very broad question. What I want to be remembered for is actually not maybe me, but the work I did, that I had an impact on sustainability, on efficiency and effectiveness somewhere in the world, and that somebody maybe sometimes remember me, or see my name and say, yeah, he did a good job in the end.
Awesome. And Felipe, what do you want to be remembered for?
That's not an easy question, but I would say it's mainly showing that it's possible to do kind of breakthrough innovation and to have impacts in the world, and also to be kind of successful, make a good living. So there's that compromise of like a win-win situation for everyone, and showing that there are other organization models that work besides the ones that we have now.
And Thomas, what do you want to be remembered for?
I wanted to be remembered by people that I used every tool possible for the collective wisdom and help the next generation to thrive and make the world a better place.
That's fantastic. And Jan, what do you want to be remembered for?
I don't want to be remembered at all, because that implies that I'm dead. And there's far too much to do. What I personally like are situations where random people on Earth who have no reason for doing so send me emails saying, Jan, thank you. What you're doing right now is not so dumb, and I really like it. So that's what I really like.
You know, that just makes me want to ask you first the other question, which is, what is greatness? How do you define it? In 15 seconds.
Greatness. Put a smile on every one of approximately 8 billion people on the face of this planet.
Awesome. And Thomas, what is greatness?
Have a bold vision that is hugely affecting the planet in a positive manner and literally make it happen.
Awesome.
Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Steve Jobs, for me, these are people of greatness.
And Felipe, what is greatness? You have 10 seconds.
Is making it work, even if the small things, making things work.
Okay, and last but not least, you get the last words, Adrian. What is greatness?
Greatness. Stay passionate about what you do and stay true to your ideals. Actually, this is the most great you can be for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas, Adrian,
Thank you, everyone.
Jan, and Felipe. We really appreciate your contributions here. And just as a note, I mean, some of the things out of the first panel, some of the things out of this panel are suggesting an idea that I've been thinking about, which is that we may want to create masterminds about specific topics with people who have passion about those topics. Those masterminds may result in policy papers. We have a platform here where we have an opportunity to present things back to certainly the EU and later, most likely, other governmental agencies. So, you know, there are some very passionate people on this session, and I think that you know, we could work together to do interesting things with that passion. So, but thank you so much for your contributions and your participation today. With that being said, we're going to move on into the next panel. And thank you, everyone. The next panel is going to be about ESG impacts. So please stick around. There's so much passion here. You know, I want to see that continue to be manifested in the next session.
Yes, so for our panelists, I think we're going to go to the next slide, Gemma. Yeah.
Yeah. So our next slide is, like I said, panel number 3, Web3, ESG impacts today versus tomorrow. We have Evine and Giacomo definitely, and also Terence all on the line. So we're ready to get started. And
hi, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm just going to double check and make sure everybody's properly unmuted just to get us going here. And Samira, if you want to throw down the first question, I think it was great the way you started the previous panel.
Yes, I think that would be good that we have a very short introduction about what you do, and then you know, just short that the audience know who you are, and then also your maybe a little bit about the environment of Web3 that you're, why, you know, what is interest, what, you know, makes it interesting for you and what you do actually in that environment. And then I would go straight to the first question, which is what are the most valuable Web3 projects today that operating commercially? So that's one of the questions I want to ask. So I would just ask
actually there was some small changes, but the first panel question for this panel, I apologize, I had to resend this document out late, but it's you know, what Web3 projects have the most impact on the environment specifically. But please go ahead, and I guess if you don't mind starting out with, you know, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about that question. Oh, and you're although you are unmuted, you're still muted. So you may have to double check your settings on your device.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. We can now hear you.
Excellent. Okay. So my name is Evine Chakosman. I lead the World Economic Forum's Crypto Sustainability Coalition, which is essentially this public-private initiative that looks at how to investigate, collate, and highlight industry standards, best practices, and examples of tangible action that attest to how exactly Web3 technologies can support communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Our wider aim as an initiative is to essentially foster a broad educational campaign on what Web3's potential and capacity looks like to better inform how governments are able to regulate these technologies in the near term and to really work in parallel with them so that there is more incentivization of innovation-first policy and investment, as well as research into the development of some of these technologies going forward.
And your thoughts on a impactful Web3 activity that's affecting the environment, or really it could be sustainability, environment, governance, take your pick, but is there something that's out there that you've been paying attention to that you think is interesting?
Yeah, well, there's so many, but just for the interest of time, I'll probably just nitpick on two that are top of mind for me. There is a regenerative finance project called Colectivo, which is working primarily in the island nation of Curacao, which is located in the Southern Caribbean. And they work to essentially enable local communities to create and manage their own economies and to develop their local currency in order to support and incentivize the protection of Curaçao's natural ecosystems. This is a project that I find really interesting because it has a community-first design approach to what we, think about in terms of climate action. And it essentially is a response to how the refi movement is sort of operating in general, regenerative finance. This is something that's really trying to take into account the negative externalities of how the traditional sustainability market pulls together public goods just for the privileged few, and the refi movement really tries to open that up to everybody, regardless of where you are, where you fall in, the map or the social political systems that we have. Colectivo is right now, I believe they pulled over 40 different grants that total to approximately 50,000 different local impact projects. And this is really interesting because these projects can range anywhere between planting these food forests in Curacao, to launching an app that empowers a lot of different members of this community to transact in Curaçao's regenerative currency. There's another project that I find really interesting called Moon Jelly, which is really this community that's harnessing the power of Web3 to essentially accelerate science and incentivize ocean conservation. There's this project that they pulled together, their first one, that uses data from satellite tags and acoustic receivers to essentially establish protection over whale migration between Antarctica and South America. I mean, how cool is that? That's so cool. And I think that projects like Colectivo and Moon Jelly are really leading with transparency in their intentions and prioritizing the experiences and realities of local communities in a way that really puts forth their experiences and empowers knowledge exchange, education, and best practices. And I really think that this is something that we're seeing envelop more across the Web3 climate space.
Thank you, Erin. And let's go to Terence. Am I pronouncing your name good, by the way? Terence?
Yeah, Terence.
Terence. So yes, if you don't mind to share a little bit of introduction about yourself and what you do, also in a Web3 perspective, and what Web3 projects have the most impact on the environment today.
Sure. So what we do here at XORD is we basically collect information on social networks. We try to understand people's conversations with regards to topics. That's our first model for revenue. And what we do is we extract sentiment from these conversations to try and understand reputation for different subjects. This can be applied to many different things, including politics. So it can be interesting to you can think of us as a survey tool for companies or governments to be able to run very extensive surveys on large populations all at once. And in the end, what we really want to do is, through this community that's collecting information, we want to fully decentralize it, so we have access to all the information going on the internet all at once, and all the different internets, so all the different countries that have different social networks and who are talking in different languages. And this is in an effort to help us minimize misinformation, so that when you have a subject that pops up and you start seeing something going on with it, you can actually have all the different versions all over the world all at once in the same place. So it's a little bit hard to understand maybe the link directly with the environment right away, but there's been a lot of disinformation circulating, especially before in the last decades, which is why I think we took a lot of time to get to where we are today. So it's also an effort to make sure this doesn't happen so much in the future. As for the projects that I think are interesting in terms of environment, I still have yet to. I'm pretty skeptic about a lot of the projects that I see, unfortunately. I've actually read up a lot of documentation, especially like scientific research on projects that have come to fruition, but that use Web3 technologies like blockchain. The main interest I see is essentially the neutrality and transparency of those systems, which I think can be really impactful for supply chains, for companies that want to look green, who want to say that they're actually doing things correctly in terms of like supply chains and production lines. So I think there's a real potential there. I don't have as much knowledge in the subject as Evin does, obviously, but yeah.
Sure. Now let's just switch to the company that is already doing some impactor stuff. So Giacomo, if I say it correctly here now, please introduce yourself and maybe a little bit talk about what for impact you guys are making, because Giacomo was introduced by EIT Energy, which they have been in a startup that have been supported by our EIT Energy sector in Europe. So yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for the brief introduction. Can you hear me properly?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you very well.
Amazing, amazing. Yes, I'm Giacomo Bravaccini, connecting from Barcelona, Spain. And I'm the head of marketing of FlexiDAO. FlexiDAO is a company based in the Netherlands and Barcelona, Spain. And we are basically providing with an end-to-end platform for both corporate energy consumers and suppliers. And we help them consuming 24/7 carbon-free electricity. And this means consuming electricity that comes from renewable sources every hour of the day. But that's not the only thing that we do, because we are also collaborating with all the crucial stakeholders of the energy industry to build the new standards for the emissions related with the energy sector. So basically, that's what we do. And I also want to thank publicly INNOEnergy for inviting us here. As you mentioned, INNOEnergy is one of our investors, and beside helping us financially, they also help us several ways. I will just mention a couple of them, with finding talents, with our new hires, but also with getting visibility, so with marketing actions and so on.
Sure. So are there any projects that you see on Web3 that are most impactful on our environment? Yeah,
exactly. Yes, I will just stay back for this question, and I just want to give an holistic reply. So for me, the ones that the most impactful are the ones that aim to harness the combination of enhanced exchange of granular data and the transparency and immutability of these data transactions. And as a third pillar, I would say that the project that foster inclusion. I just would like to make an example. The power sector is believed to represent the lion's stake when it comes to carbon emission worldwide. Well, blockchain is going to enable the market of environmental commodities, more precisely of granular energy certificates, that ultimately will finance the new wave of carbon-free electricity generation projects and other technologies, driving the complete decarbonization of the grid globally. So again, for me, there are these pillars: so exchange of granular data, transparency and immutability, but also inclusion.
Awesome.
That's a very, yeah. Go ahead, James.
So I was just going to say, from the standpoint of continuing in our curiosity points, another interesting question is, what can be done to actually, maybe another way of phrasing it, what can be done to influence founders in the Web3 space to take seriously trying to make ESG impact? Like, if we think about how some companies have come to the conclusion that doing well by doing good is a useful thing, Is there something that we can do more in order to promote that? How can we, influence founders? And I'd throw that question maybe to you, Terence, to start.
Sure. It's a tough question because, in my opinion, one of the big problems is trying to make a benefit. There are some things that you can't really make a benefit of. For example, if you're trying to like suck carbon out of the atmosphere, how do you do that? Like, how do you make money out of that? Who pays you for this? Or you have to make carbon credits and then you sell that to like plane companies, and so you're not really pulling out carbon, you're just allowing other people to put some in. So like if you want to make I think these companies need to be funded with pools of money that come from decentralized interest, people who are not trying to make a benefit, not trying to make any money. And I'm not talking about individual people in that regard. I think probably that money should come directly from governments, like some form of tax, international tax that would be applied to like many different governments all at once. And that would go directly into funding pools of money that are made for companies to start off doing things that are strictly for the good of humanity and not to make a profit, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. Evine, what do you think? What could we do to influence founders from your perspective? And you may have met some founders who found their own path, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these founders that I personally talk to all the time about some of their work in the Web3 climate space is less about ESG in the traditional sense of the term and less about sustainability as we traditionally understand it, right? I think, and all of that is to say that it's not being dismissive of what we value as sustainability in the traditional sense. I think that what I personally am finding is that innovators in Web3 are so much more trying to focus on moving away from extraction of our limited natural resources and towards the regeneration of critical operating systems that really support our natural ecosystem. So how could they actually, be successful in doing so? Well, you have a few examples that attest to that, and there are obviously other examples that don't. But what needs to happen in order to kind of go to that former trajectory? I think that there really needs to be more coordination between the Web 2 and Web 3 climate communities. I think that there could be a lot more communication, a lot more engagement, and just sort of mind sharing on some of the issues that both communities, all of us really hold dear, whether that be rainforest preservation, ocean preservation, what have you. And I think that promoting a collective approach to maximizing some of the benefits that we would love to see around achieving global impact at scale and really having a really positive impact on how humanity can really be a positive force multiplier to our natural ecosystems, as opposed to degrading it even more and not allowing, a brighter future for generations to come. I think that this is something that could be done in collaboration between these two communities, which one isn't better or worse than the other. I think that there are lessons learned and best practices that could be taken from both. And if we just push them together a little bit more, we could see more of the impacts that we want to see, at least moving out of this.
And Giacomo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, on this one, I don't have anything to add. I think I resonate very much with what Evin said. I think that the business case for doing good is talking by itself, is very strong. Actually, there is a very nice white paper by the World Economic Forum that is addressing the advantage of the early movers in the sustainability economy. So I think this is a very strong business case for both founders, but also for corporations. So I think it's very strong.
It's interesting. One of the things that Samira and I have had long conversations about actually is related to this in terms of trying to figure out how to make it clear to the investment community, make it clear to the startup community, make it clear to governments and others the opportunity. And data is part of the problem, at least from our standpoint so far. Being able to find the data, being able to find data that's valid. I appreciate Terence's efforts in terms of trying to decouple the deception from the reality of information and seeing how that can play out in different ways. Is there maybe an opportunity, and maybe I asked this of Terrence, is there an opportunity to create better publication and data collecting approaches that would make that would help make this case, that would help support impact, that would help support people's awareness? If we want governments to invest huge amounts of money, which I'm all about government as a community supporter, trying to drive and support the future, but they always need data. So are there better ways for us to collect and to distribute that information, validate that information, et cetera? Do you have any opinions?
Absolutely. I think well, part of the job has to be done on also who's the person who creates the data in the first place, right? But I think we have a lot of people that are collecting really valid information. So it's more a question of being able to access the right information. And sometimes depending on where you stand, where you are, physically, you might not be able to have access to that information. So in my opinion, it's really a question of being able to put things in perspective. So being able to have multiple standpoints, multiple different viewpoints on the same sort of subject and information, and be able to make your own opinion about it. Being able to be objective with regards to things, which I think objectivity is one of the things that really lacked, especially a couple of decades ago. I mean, I remember when I was still in high school in 2010, I still had people who had very old mentalities about the environment. I was like, well, yeah, maybe we should do something about this. And they're like, oh no, it's not a problem. Ecology is fine. Go hug a tree. So I think they lacked objectivity. They lacked access to information. Maybe they weren't looking for the information as well. But also, I think they didn't have the tools and the knowledge to actually go look for that information. So yeah, definitely, I think we could do better. Sorry.
No. That's actually very useful. I'm curious, Evine, since you said in coordination with the World Economic Forum, and since the forum does try to present communication, do you think that there's more that the forum could do to source information from a variety of viewpoints? Do you think that it is adequately doing so? And this is just off the cuff. This is just opinions. This is not, nothing official, of course.
Absolutely, and that's a great question. I think that we should be asking ourselves that question, regardless of the institution that we come from, right? But I think that I could just speak to the specific project that I'm leading. The effort that we're really trying to make with the Crypto Sustainability Coalition is to open the door to people that aren't necessarily part of the traditional big climate names that we know, really trying to set the path towards opening more of a dialogue with people that are really on the receiving end of some of these big decisions that are being made, that are completely left out of the global sustainability agenda as we know it. Some of these local communities that we talk about all of the time, that we reference just sort of nonchalantly in conversations like this, but don't necessarily bring them to these conversations, nor to some of the projects that we're trying to accomplish. So at the World Economic Forum, I think that, of course, we could always be doing more, but I think that we have been coming a long way in terms of, giving space to people that don't have the deepest pockets or the biggest names or the biggest celebrities in town, really trying to create space for people that are driving impact forward and are pulling the resources for meaningful change. And I think that that's something that I personally love about the work that I'm doing, that the forum really provides space for us to be able to do that.
Very fair. Giacomo, as you are actually associated with a actual operating decentralized autonomous organization, how does information transparency and how does information transmission work within a DAO in the first place? That's an interesting topic. I don't think everybody even understands what a DAO is to begin with, but it's a really interesting concept. I'm just curious as to how that works, and if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but I need to debunk a myth. FlexiDAO is not a DAO yet.
Uh-oh.
At the beginning,
That's it. You're done. You're done. You're canceled. Just kidding.
At the beginning, the project was to be a decentralized service provider for the new decentralized electricity grid, but the project diverted temporarily, okay, because it's not there yet, this need. So we are the founders, Simone and Greg, were beyond the current needs. So sure. We are not a DAO. So I'm not able to address this specific question right now. Maybe it's not relevant.
That's fair. Well, maybe a different way of looking at that same question is, when you think about the founders' aspirations, what were their aspirations in this regard? Why did they even think a DAO was an appropriate idea?
Yeah,
in this space.
Well, this is quite clear. This is quite clear because a DAO was trying to follow the new decentralized energy system. The energy system that we know nowadays will hopefully disappear very soon. It won't be soon, but it will disappear for sure, slowly but surely. So it will need companies that will provide decentralized services to the different decentralized generation assets. Okay, so this was the and the services. It's very complex because the electricity system is quite complex. The physics of the electricity system is quite complex. But let's say that the system needs offset energy that offsets the needs all the time. So these services will need to be provided by these kind of the new companies, and this was the idea behind our founders. Okay.
So hot take then, maybe from Evine and from Terence, just as a second on the topic of energy and decentralized energy, I'm just looking for personal opinions, but I just wonder, do we think it's possible for individuals and communities around the world to just become completely off the grid? Can we basically create a situation where everybody is using decentralized energy and they're not having to worry about being able to leverage a local grid? Because if you actually could be 100% decentralized, you remove some other carbon impacts. That's an interesting thing. You don't have to transport things around as much to provide for centralized energy producers. There's all kinds of consequences of having a decentralized model. I'm just kind of curious if you have an opinion, a personal opinion. And I don't know, Evine, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm curious to even know what the demographics are of the listeners of this call, because this is a question that could either make me get some fans or maybe some trolls. You never know. But like, hey, so with this question, I think it's a good one, and I think it's and I'm going to pivot just a little bit because I think that with this type of question, it opens up a lot more other side conversations regarding what is the appropriate usage of energy around the world. And when we're talking about digital assets, of course, there is valid concerns around its energy usage. But what I like to do, especially when I receive iterations of this type of question, is really sort of to context set around how we're looking at this globally, right? So when we're looking at, let's say, the use of crypto globally, this is something that is really trying to help people across the world not only have empowerment over how they utilize energy and have more of an ownership over what it is that it could help, their own livelihood and their own stance in the world, but also their own financial and social security in the system that they're in. So I think that a really good example that just came out was from, I believe, Chainalysis, that saw that there is an 880% jump in adoption levels of crypto year after year. And this is something that we're going to continue to see in emerging countries, especially emerging countries that don't really have, abundant energy security. So this is something that we're seeing in Vietnam, for example, and places like the Philippines, Nigeria, and a few statistics that I find personally interesting and eye-opening at times, and is really around the case of Vietnam, which is, according to a 2021 statistics by Statista, Vietnam ranks second among the top 10 unbanked nations in the world. And this same report found that 69% of the population lacks access to typical banking services and has really a limited access to energy security, social security. I mean, throw on top of that estimates by the World Bank that we see everywhere nowadays, which is that just over 61% of the country resides in rural areas of that country, and that provides very limited access to banking services. And this is a void that crypto networks is really serving to address. And this is the same thing we're seeing in places like the Philippines, which is still has a really high population of the country that remain unbanked. But all of this is to say that I think that there is a lot of good that different Web3 tools and services like crypto, for example, can provide to a lot of these populations that we don't necessarily take into consideration when we talk about, you know, the purpose of crypto or the purpose of Web3. And I think that when we look at cases like energy security, this is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of. And there are companies like Helium, for example, that are putting a lot of empowerment in the way in which we can utilize the power of community to have more ownership over how we utilize our energy, how do we work with and interact with different communities, not only in our vicinity, but across the world, and what that looks like over the future trajectory of our energy infrastructure.
Awesome. And Terrence, your hot take on that?
So before going into computer science, I actually did quite a lot of power electronics on an engineering level. So I know a few things there. I'm not an expert or anything, but I do know that like it's pretty difficult to decentralize electrical productions because of, well, just power management. You know, you need to link people up together. Otherwise, if you're just producing your own electricity and, you know, you're using only solar panels and you don't have any sun and you're in winter, well, then you can't heat yourself, and that's a problem. So there's definitely some complexity there, which is not to say that it's impossible. And I think Web3 can actually probably play an interesting role there. But on another note, what is interesting is that Bitcoin is kind of becoming, in its own twisted way, the way to measure the cost of electricity due to its mining. So you know, you could think of it. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. You could kind of think of Bitcoin as just being an electrical index for Web3, and I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. But what is interesting is definitely you could have some things branching out of that, some type of business to look into there. Perhaps people who are trying to centralize electrical productions and then trying to sell them under their own coin could be a way of doing things as well. But it's definitely a very, very difficult subject. I know a lot of people are trying to work on that because transporting electricity is extremely expensive. You lose a lot of electricity on the way. And we know that very well in France because we have nuclear power plants. We're very centralized in how we produce electricity, which means we also lose a lot of electricity on the way. So yeah, definitely a lot of things to do there.
And if I could add, just as a resource, I think that looking at some of the work that Energy Web Foundation is doing around their recently published Green Blocks initiative is something that is worth checking out. It kind of works a lot with the miners that Terrence was noting earlier, and how to kind of bridge that gap with how we can sort of utilize more energy consumption in a good way, more renewable energy consumption in a good way. So if anyone's interested in looking at a good resource in that respect, there are many, but that one just comes to mind.
I mean, I'll also throw down just like a rando tangent here. There's a company named Stronghold Digital, and what I like about their approach is that they are trying to clean up the environment, use the materials that they are cleaning up to generate power, and Bitcoin mine using basically environmental refuse. So an interesting problem of coal mines, it turns out, is that there are tailings, there's this junk that gets left behind. And you can make some arguments that that's true of almost all mining in the world. And so they've decided, okay, well, let's clean up the environment. Let's make some Bitcoin. Let's try and create a benefit and also an economic benefit at the same time. And they're out there doing that every single day right now. So I'm also fascinated by these alternative ideas that people are approaching this from, saying, well, we want to make Bitcoin less environmentally impactful, but we also want to clean up the environment at the same time. That's just one of my favorites. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that so we have not so much more time left. So I want to be respectful to everyone's time in the next panel. So I want to just, do you still want to ask those private questions that you want to go? So I think we should just start with that, and then after that we just can, ask if there is any question from the attendees, and that would be nice to give some time to that as well.
Yeah, so we had some fun questions. And Sam, do you want to start off with one of the first fun questions at the end of our list in the...
No, go for it. Go for it. Go for it, Jay.
Okay. Sure. So one of the fun questions is, what do you want to be remembered for? And I'll just throw it to Giacomo. What do you want to be remembered for in this life? That's the question. It's not about Web3,
Yeah, it's not about Web3. Yeah. Well, I would say like someone that tried to pursue truth and beauty, like one of the greatest pianists, American, by the way, said, Bill Evans. So I would say so.
Awesome. Terrence, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think I just want the people to remember me as a nice guy. That's it. No ambition there.
It's perfectly fair. It's perfectly fair. Evine, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh man, that's a heavy question, but I love it. I think I want to be remembered for my efforts to, I want to be remembered for my efforts to really just kick down previously closed doors that prohibited participation and representation from people in communities that are often left completely out of these really important conversations that we have regardless of what institution. I think that a lot of the work that I've done, whether it be at the forum, whether it be HSI, what have you, it's always been more about just convening brilliant people and like publishing 20 different white papers and like calling it a day. It's been more about prioritizing underrepresented voices first and really trying to use the resources that I have at my disposal to really open a space for that to be echoed. And if I can just continue to do that tenfold wherever I go, that would be to me the greatest accomplishment I'd want to be remembered for.
Okay, I'm going to immediately spin around and ask you the next question, which is, what is greatness to you? What does it mean?
Is this to me?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Greatness. To me, greatness is about pursuing your purpose and being relentless until you achieve that purpose, but also being conscious of how you are inspiring and lifting up others along that journey. I'd also say that I think that pushing against adversity with grace and just the courage to stay true to yourself through it all, no matter what it is also a huge part of what I value about greatness.
Fair enough. And Terrence, what is greatness to you?
Honestly, greatness is just being very kind to others, being positive, and just trying to do your best with what you have, and being compassionate about people who have less or just haven't been as lucky as you. That's it.
That's great.
And Giacomo, what is greatness to you?
Yeah, I will link back to something that Evan said. I mean, for me, greatness is something about stay true to yourself regardless external inputs, you know, and being kind. Also, be kind regardless external negative inputs. I think kindness is a very big value, and we need a lot of kindness in this world.
That's very fair. And Samira, I'm going to ask you, what do you want to be remembered for? I asked you earlier what greatness was to you, but I'm going to ask you, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think what I want to be remembered for is someone that people would talk that person had a great life. And you know what? She did a lot of good things as well. That's it. Like, you know, I think we're all here to enjoy it as well and not take it all so serious. So, and to do as much good and kindness as Yamiko said to the world, and appreciate that, you know, we have this opportunity. And I think there is a big opportunity or job for all of us that we are fortunate to, you know, to be remembered good because we can have impact.
No, I appreciate that. So I want to, you know, we've asked you guys a lot of questions. I kind of want to ask each of you to come up with one question on the spot to ask each other. So with that being said, anyone want to step up to the plate and throw down a question? We have a couple minutes, so I want to take advantage of them in an interesting way.
I guess I would ask both of my fellow panelists what what do you want, or like what are some points of wisdom or guidance that you give people that are entering this space? It could be a little daunting sometimes, and there's just a lot going on and it's constantly evolving. You know, what are some, you know, what's some knowledge exchange that you share with people entering or wanting to enter this space?
Yeah, for me, stay curious. Be very curious and always start from a data-based standpoint, because you will encounter a lot of people that will argue your positions, and you will need to have data backing your position. This is the engineer that is coming out of me.
Real world use cases, do your own research. Yes.
Yeah, this is the undercover engineer, even if now I'm a marketer.
Fair.
Yeah. I guess for me, it's I'd say, you know, sometimes it's just all about luck. If you don't manage, it's not necessarily because you didn't manage with what you did. It's also sometimes just because you didn't get lucky. So persevere, and you know, you don't always need to pivot. Sometimes it's just you haven't found the right opportunities. So don't give up, and acknowledge that a lot of people who are successful are also people who've gotten very lucky. One doesn't really go without the other. So just, you know, keep that in mind. Hard work and luck, both.
Yeah. Have the courage to stay in it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So what question would you ask, Giacomo, of your co-panelists?
How did you end up here in this?
Oh my God, did you see our eyeballs just like boom? Good question.
You know, might be an interesting story because we have different motivation, different backgrounds. So I think it's also relevant to understand the point of departure.
I'm gonna crack a joke, but I think yeah, I'll answer this one honestly. So yeah, I actually wanted to launch a company to fight misinformation for a while. I have to say it did get a little bit more severe during that period of time where a certain Republican was president. And I just wanted to come up with a system that could help like filter out information a bit more, because I was pretty appalled by some of the things that were said, even just worldwide, and that has nothing to do with one specific president, to be honest. And so that's really why like the starting point for EXORT, I was trying to find the right people to actually do this. And when it became clear that I needed to make a system that was going to be as neutral as possible with regards to information, with the community everywhere in the world collecting information regardless of political bias and everything, then I started understanding pretty quickly that I need to go in Web3 because that's where things are happening right now.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no worries. I was just gonna say that I came into this far left field. My background is in foreign policy and public diplomacy. That I worked at Homeland Security investigations for a while, did a lot of work in public policy consulting, and ultimately found myself wanting to work at the World Economic Forum. They had a cool, really interesting project around digital justice. So I pushed that forward. And once it was over. One of my former supervisors, she was like, I'm doing this crypto project. I want to do this crypto thing at the forum. A lot of people are asking us about it. Do you want in? You want to help me build this thing out? And I was like, yes, I am totally in. I'll just like, you know, I found it super interesting and I was up for the challenge. And now I find myself here talking to all of you about Web3 and climate. Never thought that that would happen, but I find this one of the most enriching industries and topics that I've come across thus far in my professional career. And I'm excited to see where it'll go from here.
Awesome. What about you, Terrence? Do you have a question for your co-panelists?
Yeah, I've had the time to come up with one, so luckily for me. So I would say, what would you want to achieve?
I can go ahead. I would love to achieve, at least with the work that I'm doing right now, I want to go further than just pieces of white papers. I want to, you know, do something that'll put more of a visual testimony to a lot of these people that we're talking about with our work. We're talking to a lot of indigenous communities and people that are climate advocates for, you know, a lot of different countries and topics around the world. And if I can just sort of utilize more mediums to tell those stories and put a spotlight on them as opposed to the typical people that get those opportunities, that would be a really great achievement that I'd love to see happen.
Yeah, in my case, maybe, yeah, I really want to share knowledge because I really see that in this space and in general there is a need for more knowledge. And this is also what we are doing at FlexiDAO now, that we are launching a 24/7 carbon-free energy academy, just to you know, to put out there some corporate-friendly educational material to decarbonize their operations. So for me, it's a matter of sharing knowledge, co-create, and advance together towards a decarbonized economy. We have a unique opportunity here, and knowledge is at the base of it. I think this is what it's about.
Nice, thank you both for answering a not so easy question.
How about you? I'm curious about your answer. What do you want to achieve?
Well, I'm already trying to achieve it. I'm trying to achieve a system that's going to help, hopefully, allow people to have all the different sides of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah, but
it is easier said than done. Yeah, and they have actually many tried, and it's like, how do you do that, right? That's another topic, honestly, which is very interesting. And who knows, maybe you would set up a webinar and we help you with that, Laurent. But we had a very interesting conversation and we had a pre-chat with you. And I think, yeah, it's a very interesting what you're going with that. And I wish you best of luck because, you know, it's important. Media is extremely important to all of us, and how we use it and how we get access and how transparent it is, how real it is. And so, you know, history has been always written by the winners. So how can we get rid of that, right? Because not only winners, they should be here in a storylines, right? So I think, yeah, it's a best of luck. Thank you everyone for all of this interactive session and beautiful session. So JM, I leave it to you for a transition to the next. So how you want to approach it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Giacomo, Terrence, and Evine.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and we appreciate your contributions. Please feel free to hang about for the remainder. Our last session will be, I think, interesting. There's going to be some discussion of art. There's going to be some discussion of where things are headed in terms of NFTs and other things. And there's also one of my colleagues who might be having a little bit of technical difficulty, but Maggie Sklar will also be talking a little bit about the regulatory impacts.
Next slide. Sorry, JM. We
yeah,
got to go to next slide.
No,
next
yeah,
slide.
Understood.
Okay. Sorry.
So the key point is that we'll be getting started in just a moment, but we'll be talking with David Grin, with Maggie Sklar, and with Ali Hosseini. We'll be talking about emergent landscape some of the more interesting things, like I said, happen to deal with art. So I've taken the opportunity, well, Samira and I have taken the opportunity to sort of put a little bit more emphasis in that direction. Like I said, Maggie may be having a little bit of technical difficulty, but we can go ahead and get started here. I want to thank Ali and David for joining us today, and we will go ahead and kick it off. Samira, do you want to throw down?
Yeah, yes, and I want to see, we see the attendees numbers are going down. We started from 50 and we're going down. That's because it's late in Europe maybe, but I want to say we kept, I don't want to say all of it, but some of our best speakers are going to be now. So I hope you stick around with us, because we have David, we have Ali, we had extremely knowledgeable. We have Maggie that is going to join us. So stick a little bit around, because this is going to be a very interesting panel for all of you. So yes, thank you so much. So we have, so David, your name is a little bit, I mean, what I hear is it's a known in the world you're in this art. So and now we talk with you, Ali, about what you are doing. You were introduced by EIT culture actually and creativity. So we thank EIT for introducing you to us, and I think you're doing some projects with them. So I would like to start that you guys introduce yourself a little bit and what you do and your interest about the Web3, and then I would get to the first question, which is going straight to look at in deep more to the European innovation ecosystem on Web3. You're on mute, David. Yes. John Michael, do you mind unmute David? Hold on, I can do it as well.
Yeah, hold on one second. Sorry about that. Unmuting and unmuting.
Yeah. You're on mute now, David.
Hi.
So.
Hello.
And we lost you, Ali, on the screen.
Oh, I know. I was just turning something off.
Sure. Okay, David, do you want to start with introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and you know, and then getting to the question about Web3 and the European innovation ecosystem. What kind of Web3 technology emerging strongly in the European innovation ecosystem? What do you see?
Also, really quick, Maggie is actually in the attendee list, so I've unmuted her. She's actually in here, but she's having a little trouble with the panelist webinar piece. So she should be able to speak, I think, but in any case, just a little heads up. Please go ahead, David.
Hi, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. I've been working with time-based media for the last 20 years. So I've seen it sort of evolving of technology with artists moving image from 35mm till now, and I guess so it's always been evolving since I started, and I've seen changes, and I've seen crashes and dips and rises in economies, and I've seen excitements and depressions, and I guess I came into what I've been doing with data was to basically find a way to empower and fund artists to make work and to find outcomes for them, which has been my role really for the last 20 years. First showing it, distributing it, and now then producing it and working to find, in a way, set up a logic. There were no real competitive marketplaces in the art space empowering artists working with digital media. There was just a very few. So when I launched it, one of like less than a handful that I knew of, and even subsequently a few of those went under because of the sort of various market forces. And I guess the logic was, how do you encourage galleries, museums, artists to show, make, sell, produce work? You need a market, and you need competitive market. And I guess I always was imagining there would be a time when it would be greater. I just never imagined it would be like the time we're having now. And I wished for this, but I didn't wish it to be this explosive. So I guess I've got what I wished for, but you can't, like, it's like the genie out of the bottle. You can't control it. And I don't think I ever wanted to. And I guess now I'm trying to find my way into a sort of Web3 headspace and finding a way that I can work with it and deliver on it to serve the artists that I've been trying to nurture who work with the technologies.
So getting back straight to the question as well, so what Web3 technologies are emerging strongly in European innovation hubs today? Do you see anything on that space that you could share with us, David? And then we go back to, and then we go to Ali.
It's just, you know, everything we're hearing and reading. It's you know, from blockchain, crypto, NFT, language, you know, the language around, you know, people wanting to do things with the metaverse and AI, and I mean, I could list everything that we already know, but it's kind of, there's some of the things some people are clutching at straws. It's, from my point of view, it's always been what artists want to work with, and because in a way we're now hitting an area where it's almost the technology is leading the artist, and it's not something I'm very comfortable with. I'm very comfortable in supporting artists who want to use technologies, and in a way where artists are trying to find ways they can fund themselves. They're seeing it now with those technologies. So, you know, there's nothing, I mean, I'm always interested in what comes next. And so I think that, from my perspective, is what artists often are leaders in terms of tapping into the zeitgeist of new innovations. Watching artists dabble with things, some get better than others, and that's what my headspace is in, just try and work with and find the artists who are really making great art with current and future technologies.
Thank you, David. Ali, welcome. And maybe a little bit of introduction about yourself and your involvement in a Web3 space, and what, I mean, and about what you see in European ecosystem, because you're American and you moved to Europe, I believe, a couple years ago, right? So you actually have a sense. Yeah, 10 years, right? So you have a sense of both world as American who lives in Europe. So yes, please.
Thank you for having me, Samira and John Michael. So I guess let me just start with the top level thing, because my career has been quite varied, but one goal I've always had is putting poetry in the machine. It became very clear to me early on when I was studying philosophy, and that's actually where most of my training is, philosophy and the sciences, that we were engineering more and more of the world and disconnecting ourselves from nature. And it seemed like there were two ways to rehabilitate that. One is to go back to nature. Unlikely, given the 8 billionth person that's joined the planet. Nature can't sustain us, at least living as close to the earth as we might want to. The other is to have a more humane environment. So I thought, well, if we're going to live in this machine-made environment or automated industrial environment, at least we should have the possibility of poetic expression. And if you look at the camera, it started out as a tool for representation and replication, but it became an artistic medium. And the same thing has happened with many, many technologies. So I've always thought we should take these technologies and we should use them as tools for self-expression and also introspection, and ideally ways of representing the world to ourselves that are sustainable. Because if you can't have a direct encounter with the earth, you need to have a culture of ecology, which actually is what brought me to the EIT and the organization that we're associated with, because I wrote an essay called Culture of Ecology for the next Renaissance. It was the manifesto of the EIT Culture and Creativity KIC, Knowledge Innovation Community. So, but along the ways, I've been a practicing artist for decades, starting with photography and video and film, and then moving to video, and then as video became digital, so did I. Although I've programmed computers all my life, but when there was a kind of convergence, you know, especially in the 90s and knots, where you could start to actually make things. Although I know computer artists go back to the very beginning, but I started getting interested in it around the knots, and then but I was doing immersive video installations. Oftentimes they're usually multimedia or Kunstwerke. So they're all-encompassing pieces which incorporate video, human presence, voices, and compositions and choreographers. But I'm also a senior fellow in engineering research at King's College London. So all of this came together about 4 years ago when I co-founded an institution called National Gallery X, and that's where it's here in London. It's on the National Gallery campus, and that's where we've been looking at how technologies affect both the creation of art and audience reception of art, and how people are going to experience art in the future, both as makers and as audiences, and increasingly as interact. There's always been an interactive quality for art. I think, even looking at a painting, half of it's in your head, half the meaning is. But now artists truly becoming interactive and participatory. So to get to your topic, with Web3, it is a natural move to go there, as many artists have, and I'm interested in it from both the standpoint of expression and market making for art. As an artist, of course, I've made pieces that could be arguably called NFTs, and it looks like a handy market. Usually I use art as a research tool, or I get commissions. On the other hand, looking at the ones that are coming out strongly in Europe, I think we're really at an infrastructure phase. I mean, we're looking at, I would consider, there's not just technologies that are important, there's regulation and market access. So some of the things going on with the MICA project, and rather law, the framework for regulating cryptocurrencies and tokenization, token markets, is really, really important. We could see something like GDPR happening, where compliance starts to become a selling point for people worldwide. So I think really in the US and the rest of the world, you have a very fragmented market. Europe could be it's already the largest amount of activity for various forms of distributed ledger exchanges, tokens, NFTs, whatever, cryptocurrencies. It could become the largest market. So we see a lot of movement going on in networks and application environments. FinTech, London's a big FinTech center, but there's a lot going on in Paris. Next week in Helsinki, there's the Flush conference, and Flush, I think it's probably the largest matchmaking technology conference, and there's a big Web3 component there. And then aside from this concentration of FinTech and gaming, you really have very strongly in the United Kingdom, which I'll just count as part of the EU anyway. Right. But you have there's storage solutions going on in Germany. You have a company called KIV. There's a lot of we've heard stuff about sustainability, and there's travel marketplaces based on decentralized business systems, carbon credits markets, and you find this in Berlin. A lot of investments going on there. Skills marketplaces in Denmark. So I can go into this in more depth if you like.
Yes, no, thank you, Ali. Thank you for that introduction. So I want to give the floor to Maggie to introduce herself. Her camera doesn't work, unfortunately. So Maggie, can you speak? And then I start my question with you. Can you? I want to test if you can hear us and you can talk clear. Okay, no, it looks like we have still some technical issues with my. Oh yes.
No, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, hi Maggie.
Really not sure what's happening with the video, but hopefully you can hear me on the audio. So I might have missed the question, but I think it's briefly an introduction.
Yes, introduction. Okay. Because so for you, we might have it a little bit turned because you're not your U.S. Federal Reserve, which is really important to my understanding, and the impact you guys have on in the United States. So maybe a little bit introduction about the work you do at the Federal Reserve, and also, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the web technologies that are emerging strongly in the United States, innovation hubs. So that would be interesting to hear from you.
Sure. So my background is I'm currently a partner at a law firm called Davis Wright Tremaine in their banking and financial services and fintech groups. But my experience before that was I'd served over 10 years in the US government at senior levels at the Federal Reserve and the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. In both roles, I did both domestic policy and work on crypto and fintech, but I was also at the Fed, the Director of International Engagement. And at the CFTC, I was the Associate Director of international affairs. So within those roles, I also had a lot of did a lot of work with European regulators, European companies, others trying to do cross-border harmonization when it came to various financial rules, and including crypto and fintech. But at the time, it was very nascent. So it was more, I worked in a lot of sort of like working groups or task forces. It has become much more elevated since then, you know, obviously following the FSB work, which obviously the European Union is part of, as is the Fed and the CFTC, and the IOSCO work on, you know, what the crypto landscape and NFT landscape and digital asset landscape might look like. I was involved in that on the earlier stages and through many of the stages, actually. So, you know, so that's sort of my background. I'm also a lawyer by training, but most of what I've been doing recently and through this has been policy work and advising others and international, like advising on international engagement.
So maybe we should ask you actually a different question. Maybe we should not. I think maybe for audience would be more interesting if we learn a little bit about the regulations that are affecting art and Web3 intersection. So, what are your thoughts on that, Maggie? What is your experience on that?
On specifically just digital assets generally?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And how regulatory policy is affecting and can affect the ability for digital assets to become a effective medium for artists and others.
Right. So, you know, so I'll take it in two parts. I'll start just generally with the regulation, and then I do want to address the art part, because I have my own personal view is they're a little separate, which is that, I mean, I was involved in the beginning of the international regulatory talks between the United States and Europe and the major jurisdictions. This is probably 2015, maybe, about cryptocurrency and fintech. So, you know, I get for people involved in the industry, this seems very, very slow and painfully slow. But from a government perspective, it's rather quick. That this stuff's happened. We were discussing this years ago, but at the time, it was more of a learning phase. It is not a learning phase anymore. If you've read what's coming out of IOSCO and FSB, and from, you know, the drafts from the U.S. Congress, you know, it's more negative on certain aspects of the crypto world. Although, frankly, MiCA, even though, you know, Europe is always sort of considered, at least from the U.S. perspective, from a regulatory perspective, more prescriptive, lenient when it comes to DeFi and some other aspects, which we can talk about too. I don't want to, you know, take over that part of the conversation, but you know, because I want to also turn to the art aspect, because I think it's interesting because, and again, this is my personal opinion, being a former senior financial regulator, is that I think art in the Web3 world and the NFT world is escaping regulatory scrutiny because it's a real use case. It doesn't look like, and I've had conversations with my former colleagues at senior levels in the government too about this. Like, it doesn't look like, you know, a pump and dump. It doesn't look like, you know, speculation. There's a real use case, right? And there's multiple real use cases on the art side, and so it's not getting the same. I'm going to use the word scrutiny, but I would say even just, you know, not the same, you know, interest in, because there's a real use case for digital art. There's a real use case for art in the metaverse. There's a real use case. Even I played Second Life. Someone mentioned Second Life earlier. I mean, I played Second Life like 15 years ago. Like, I have no idea where my paintings went there, but they were fun at the time, and there was a use case there. So, you know, I think the significance of art in particular and the use cases changes a bit, but you know, when it comes to different uses. But that said, we'll get into other questions too about, I mean, there are legitimate use cases well beyond the everything's a Ponzi scheme, you know, type of viewpoint that the United States has taken, and healthcare and education and others, but we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Sounds great. So one of the things that I guess, since you brought it up briefly there, the Ponzi schemes, but if we just look at the pump and dumps, the Ponzi scheme, cybercrime, the safety and security aspects of all this, I'm curious, you know, if you have an opinion, David, on those problems and what, you know, are we just doomed? Really, is it like volcano, the super volcano is coming up and cybercrime is just going to take over the whole space? Or do we think that, you know, some interesting things are happening to trim that back and to make provenance more manageable, to make realism in the projects more manageable? You know, what's happening there that you've noticed, and what's improving the situation, if anything?
I mean, I probably started at the end. My feeling is I've wished for crime to be happening in the digital media since I've started working in it, because there wasn't any. It was like non-existent. And I've always observed they've usually got crime where people perceive value, and there's absolutely nobody stealing a digital artwork that I was ever aware of, and I've dealt with a lot. I've had question after question in the last 20 years at any talk, and I don't mean in the last few years, was, oh, what if somebody steals my artwork? What if somebody steals a digital file? I'm thinking, if only, and then you know you've got value and success. And I've often said that, and now we're getting to the point where there's value, and there's this thing has an important structure now, because you've got people who are making lots of money and people who own things that are worth perceived a lot of money. And I guess that's where probably elements within a really good working blockchain have really great structures. And I don't know if we're really there yet, and I don't think we're there yet, but the logics within current technologies is sound and good. I've just never been interested in safety and security. I've seen people who've bought, you remember stories of people buying 70 million Van Gogh and putting them into safes, and I've always thought, well, so you've just no longer got a work of art anymore, you've just got an item in a safe that no one can ever see. So I'm kind of a big fan, not like I don't believe anyone should be a criminal, I don't have a big lot of time for them, and I really don't want anyone to steal anything, but the question about that is my opinion here. It's
that's great.
I wish for more of it. Yeah.
Well, there's I mean, I hate to go on a tangent, but there is a famous movie right now called The Painter and the Thief, and it's well worth watching for anyone, but it does kind of talk to this, like, perception, is there value? And then suddenly there's a thief, and suddenly the interesting part is that you can make some arguments that the value to the painter and the thief were increased by just participating in that experience together. So it's interesting. Ali, what is your thought? I mean, you know, super volcano or manageable chaos? I mean, I feel like where David's going is manageable chaos.
I'd say it's definitely manageable chaos. I mean, a lot of the cybercrime in art really resembles traditional art crime, and art has always been subject to fraudulence, issues of provenance, faking, inflated prices, enforced scarcity, just outright theft. And in fact, you know, it happens in really venerable galleries and things like that. So I actually think it's probably safer to have a digital artwork out there, because the blockchain and is actually, once it's secured, I mean, there are ways around it, but it's probably at least as secure as a physical artwork. So I'd say if without venturing too strong an opinion, I'd say it's about probably the scale that you find in the art world. And there's a lot more crime going on in art and museums than you would we probably realize. There's a lot of fraudulence in museum collections, and of course it's everybody's interest not to say that they're hanging a fraud in such and such museum, but that's the case. Right now, people are stealing work off of DeviantArt, just basically, you know, downloading JPEGs, you know, popping a price on them and sticking them into an NFT marketplace. But that kind of thing has also happened. People have often stolen someone else's work and put their signature on it. So I'd say it's business as usual, actually, and with the hope that some of these technologies can be used on the one hand to track provenance in the real world. So now you can really, actual paintings, once they've reached some level of validation, can have embedded codes that are then will pass through them, as they go through various private hands and museums. So I think it's actually a situation that's going to improve both the traditional art market and will become more tightly managed online as well.
Okay, so I'm going to have a little fun with Maggie here for a second. I'm going to ask, okay, so if we take what Ali and David said, basically what I'm hearing is that we should burn every single Banksy, turn it into an NFT, and manage it as a digital asset from here henceforth, and forget having a physical asset at all. I'm kidding a little bit. It is a controversial statement, but on the other hand, people have done this. People have taken at least one Banksy that I'm aware of, burned it, created an NFT off of the experience of seeing the thing being burnt, and that is now the only existing copy of, well, the only existing official, I guess, copy of that particular Banksy. So Maggie, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about this? Like, just a personal opinion, forget about being, professional in any way. What do you feel about the burning of art to create NFTs?
I wish I could figure out how to turn on the camera, because, like, honestly, I've been on 1,000 panels and I'm struggling with this, because I would suggest I would take a screenshot and create an NFT right now. And then I'd ask all of the panelists here too what they think about my NFT and what we should, price it as. So, there's, again, like, value in the NFTs, and it comes from the art perspective. Like, obviously but there's also, business and regulatory risk, particularly if you're fractionalizing it as to, how that, in the United States at least, it's pretty much makes it a security. There's also just the fun of having NFTs and art NFTs and owning something that you would never be able to otherwise own, right? But I've also heard some folks tell me that they thought their NFT was legitimate, but it turned out, and they bought on OpenSea, which everyone sort of assumes is the legitimate place to buy things, at least in the United States, and then it turned out that it was a fraudulent NFT. So that said, the only NFT I own at this point is someone let me take a picture of their Bored Ape NFT, and then I was like, oh, so now I have an avatar and an NFT. It's a real problem, right? When you think about it from, like, a not just a creative perspective and but in an IP perspective, a cybersecurity perspective, like, what do you really own? How do you protect the people creating these? How do you protect the original artists? How do you make sure they're getting the royalties? Because people have, since I joined law firm practice and left the government, been much more honest with me about how it is they're somehow getting around some of the things that even, regulators want to, sort of cabin and control and help, prevent, abuses from happening. If an NFT is what it's, particularly in the art world, is meant to be what it's meant to be, then it should, give you the rights to what it's meant to give you the rights to. And I'm talking from a US perspective. I know another panel mentioned the GDPR earlier, right? There's, data privacy aspects, like, what if your kid's in an NFT? What if your kid created an NFT? What if your kid is fractionalizing an NFT? Where, there's all sorts of other, aspects. I just hope that doesn't stop the innovation for it, because I think they're pretty cool. And we'll probably get to it later, like things that I think it's on the question list at some point. But, one of the things I never got to do as a federal regulator was own crypto or NFTs. And, it's weird to be regulating something that you don't really quite get to do. And I think I've learned a lot more from learning from the community and the industry and the innovators out there.
So I'm curious, are we creating this situation? It feels like in, countries where there's more of a regulatory framework and where there's a lot more institutionalization of what exactly it means to have a security or the securitization of an asset, we're creating a situation where basically all artists should move like out of Europe, out of the United States. They should move to like, I don't know, Monaco or El Salvador, where, you know, they're trying to create a blockchain country, a Bitcoin country. Should all artists basically move in order to be able to participate in these new forms of revenue and economic creation? Or
I can't give legal advice on this webinar. but if you're saying hypothetically, do people ask me about going to the Caymans or Cyprus or Singapore or other places? Hypothetically, yes. And, you know, I'd be interested in hearing from, you know, the folks in the, you know, community that are doing this too, because there's, that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the United States. It's unfortunate for the European Union to not bring in, you know, capital, jobs, employment, taxes too, right, into our countries, and, you know, to let all this stuff go abroad.
Yeah, that being said, so yeah, curious on
Yeah,
your hot takes, David and Ali, in regard to those things.
I mean, there's quite a few things to unpack there, but I kind of think the artist has always been sort of outside of the system. One of the reasons of people wanting to be an artist is they're not joining into sort of normal systems. I mean, I don't know many artists who have pensions and have job security, and we often talk about them as though they kind of have this. It's like we're now talking about the Cayman Islands for like maybe like a handful of artists who've made a ton of money, and then we're talking about corruption. Really, when we start talking about people who don't want to pay taxes and people want to escape to somewhere else, we're talking about the idea of there's the extreme wealth. Most artists don't operate in that environment. I don't know many, and most artists just want to make artworks. That's why they became artists. They're not thinking about wealth. They're not thinking about how rich they're going to get. And then when we're talking about how you can make an NFT of some snapshot or this thing, and it's just more, the point is actually they're not artworks. They're kind of this idea of this new technology that everyone's getting excited about, that I can be an artist, but I don't want to start talking about the amateur artist in this context, because everyone can be an artist. Conversation is not what this is really about. Otherwise, everyone can be a technology guru. That's and everyone can be a dentist.
Yeah, it's very fair. It's very fair.
So I just think, but also that regulation, artists are often, what about regulation of something where it's because there's criminality, and regulation because there's dodginess, and regulation because people don't want to pay taxes, and those normally aren't artists. Normally artists are good people. Normally artists are people who you know, feel like they're egalitarian and want to support each other and other communities, and they're usually charitable. I mean, that's the norm. And when we start having outsiders becoming artists because they can see how much money they make, we're now talking about another language. And I think that language is conflating now, and that doesn't mean it's all bad. It just means we're sort of in some like weird hubbub, and people think it's, oh, the artists we have to regulate, but actually we need to be regulating the people who are making money out of the artists, possibly more than the artists. So
it's very fair.
Very fair.
Ali, what's your hot take?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably the collectives that would move to the tax havens more than the artists. I agree with David and Maggie. I think that well-regulated environment is where the most artists, and by corollary, the most people will thrive. And I'd like to just expand the definition of art to include, you know, culture and, you know, intellectual property of any sort, or expression of any sort. And I think the really exciting thing for me about this technology is the fact that, well, people are putting up their photographs on all over social media. They're not, and this came up in earlier panels, they're not getting paid for them. And all of these creative, but they are creative expressions by some, you know, in some hierarchy of creative expression or intellectual property, if you will. And the fact is if we start to tokenize these and give people control over them, then they can monetize them. They can make money off of it. So we have at the one end, art is a great use case because it's so prominent. I think it's driven a lot of interest in crypto assets in general, aside from the speculative part. Maggie's right. It's actually an actual use case, and there'll be more places. You know, maybe people have giant video monitors or video walls where they can put their NFTs. Definitely being able to take art objects from, you know, maybe your Second Life paintings could go into some video game or whatever replaces Second Life, so you have portability of objects among games. Gamers really do value their objects, and those objects have real hard currency or fiat currency, whichever you prefer, value. Sure. So you have all these items being produced in games, or won in games, or articulated in games, and being able to portability into other environments is important, between virtual and, you know, increasingly real environments where they may be superimposed, and they are. And then you also have the possibility of micropayments for IP, which I just think is very, very exciting. And art is just the cutting prow that will pull a lot of other people along with it.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I've said this before, I think it's an accurate statement that art is what inspires humanity to grow, advance, and imagine possibilities. So I'm very much a favor of you know, the artist as a dividing the ocean ahead and being the cutting prow of that. So I want to throw it to some of the personal questions. Those, I think everybody on here has actually heard some of these questions answered by some of the other panelists, but Sam, do you want to ask the first personal question?
So remember, I think the first one was what is value? You came with those, so just during the session. So I think I think it would be better if you do that, because I don't.
Sure.
Yes. What do you value?
What do you want to be remembered? How do you want? I guess how do you want to be remembered? So Maggie, first, how do you want to be remembered in this life?
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. I know everyone has struggled with this question because it's very meta, which we haven't really gotten as much into the metaverse as I thought maybe during this particular panel, but I will use the word meta. I'll take aside the personal and just focus on the professional, which is that, you know, I've spent a lot of time and many years helping preserve financial stability, not just in the United States, but globally. But I also want to be remembered for not just being that person, but also helping to foster innovation and the next wave of things for, you know, technology and what my kids will get to experience and see things that are going to be different and hopefully better than, you know, what I, you know, experienced. And I can't prevent the next financial crisis, but I hope that they don't have to suffer as many financial crises and recessions. And I hope between my private and public work that I help contribute to that.
Awesome. Ali, what about you? What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, if I'm remembered at all, I hope someone remembers me as part of the solution.
That's very, very specific, but also very broad. I like that. I like that. So, David, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think I'd like to be remembered for my breakfast that I make for me and my wife. I think they would be a really good start to being remembered, because I think they really are great. Porridge, avocado, egg, mushroom risottos are some of my great skills.
Really inviting myself to London for that, David, just because it's also on our conversation you were talking about your cooking skills. So anyway.
Well, I live across town, so I'm going to have to get myself
Here we go.
Breakfast is very intimate, but, you know, we can try and expand intimacy. And then I like to be supportive to those around me, my wife, my sons, Isaac and Jacob, and Max the dog. But I feel like I'd love if it was a bit more like deeper, someone I feel who's championed and empowered future artists is probably what I would like to be remembered by. But a bit like Ali, if one's remembered at all, you know, one only puts out and one gets back what, you know, you get back what you put out. And I feel like I've made it my mission to empower others. So that's yep.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And Ali, what is greatness to you?
Greatness, I'd say moral compass and compassion.
Fair, fair. And David, what is greatness to you?
I'd say, like, if I think of someone with greatness, it would be someone who has charismatic inspiration and provides empowerment to others with generosity and kindness. I can't think of too many of those, but I pick a few people in the world, but I don't want to name anybody, but it's, yeah.
That's awesome.
You
And
guys
Maggie,
artistic.
and Maggie, what is greatness to you?
I think about it from the perspective of I'll just Tikkun Olam. That's a principle I try to live by. Leave the world a better place than you left it. So that could be for people different things, whether it comes to the environment or children or charitable donations and things like that. But Tikkun Olam.
Awesome. And I just want to say thank you, David. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Maggie, for participating in what has been a fun sort of rollicking adventure for our last panel of the day. I think that there's so much more that can be said, and I really look forward to to being able to continue the conversation. We've talked about in the last panel, or maybe it was the one before, the idea of potentially creating mastermind groups and other forms of community as we continue forward from this launch moment. With maybe the objective of creating policy papers sometimes, and maybe the objective of just making friends, and maybe the objective of just beating ideas to a pulp and seeing what they can turn into. I love all those things, but we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to continuing that conversation. Any final words, Sam, as far as this panel?
No, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation. It's been very, rich. And I have to say, art is very close to both me and John Michael. So we're really happy that it might be too long for many people, but I hope maybe we can just do it in the next sessions, that we have more focus, narrow focus in the shorter sessions, that people could hang out, because, I wish they could all hear you as well as the last panel, because we lost quite more than a half of the attendees. So that's what I'm concerned, because this was a very interesting panel as well. But I guess that's hope you guys stay around. This was our first event, so yeah. Hope you enjoyed it as well as a panelist.
Thank you. I always think that at the very end you get it's like you almost want to have the start at the end of a panel. The brain's subsumed into what other people think and how you can hear them. And you can't really hear other people until you kick in. So I've loved hearing everybody else you've had on the day so far. The other panels were exciting too. I like the last one. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So with that being said, Sam, you are up next, and it is really about you and sharing with us some of the road ahead for this coming year. I have all kinds of questions I can personally ask you about that, but I'm curious as to what you'd like to share, and I can certainly add to it by asking you, some questions to prompt some of that.
Yes, I think we're gonna have more of this, either Web3 or more like this webinars like this, that we're gonna have panelists coming and talking. Our intention is to create this platform where we can get transatlantic kind of platform that people can share ideas and passions, and it's all about like how can we actually bring this worlds more together and collaborate together, honestly, and solve problems as mentioned. So how can we all have impact in this world from bigger EIT? It's a tool as well as a platform as well as an organization that is working very hard. It doesn't have a personal agenda, of course, right? That makes it very unique. And I think that have said, we're setting up in a startup scale up program which is going to be launched this year. So I am hoping to announce it actually next year to many of. So if you're a startup in Europe, or you know European startups that they like to connect with us, please you know, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can share more about the program on that. And you know, stay tuned, because we are going to announce more of those webinars, and hope to see you on our next event.
And there are some questions that related directly to this. So there was an earlier question from Parascoel about how to interact with or partner with EIT and with the EU in helping European governments or firms to achieve their ESG or SDG goals. I mean, how should individuals, startups, founders, whatever, how should people interact with EIT? Maybe a short thought on that.
Depends where they are and which segment they are. As Laurent this morning mentioned, there are 9 different KICs, which just stands for Knowledge Community Centers. There's, did I say, yes, KICs we call it. It's for us just so obvious that we just use it. So I think that would be very interesting to know which, you know, which segment or which sector you're actually busy, and then from that, you know, looking, and then I'm happy to connect you as well, or either reach out to me. But I am in the United States, so of course my responsibility is much more focused on the US and people that they reach out to the hub here. But to helping them with expansions, and either just representing EU when it comes to education and how we can actually, you know, exchange some of that. But so if you have any, if you think you want to know more, please connect with me directly, and I can share with you. I'll connect you with my right colleagues. But it's very important which sector they're busy. Yeah,
and there's a little bit of a historical question that was asked by one of the audience members in regard to EIT, which is, how did this even happen? Why did the EU create EIT? What was the prompter for that?
So there are many answers. I mean, I would just, oh, Laurent is coming. Laurent, yes, Laurent, this is your question. Go for it. I mean, I have my own version answer, but I feel like Laurent wants to answer this question.
Please.
Because it's a very interesting question. Laurent, go for it. Yeah.
And hold on one second. I just noticed, Laurent, that you're muted. So please, please continue now.
Thank you, John Michael, for unmuting me. No, this is a very interesting question, of course, and history is interesting. Not that old, but this is really actually an idea of the one of the previous president of the European Commission, President Barroso, who set up this this EIT with a group of high-level people in the Commission, and also the support of the Council of Europe and the Parliament back in 2008. And there was, at the time, 300 million euros set up for this to create the first 3 communities, EIT Digital being one of them. So Samira knows this very well. And then from there, we demonstrate some impact, some results, and convince the stakeholders to bring us into Horizon 2020 and get a big budget of top up of 2 billion. And this is the idea was, really to create the next generation of entrepreneurs, to support the innovators of Europe in all the countries, also with this aspect of really developing the regional ecosystems in not just the Western Europe or Nordic Europe, but also, Central Europe, Southern Europe, connect all these and focus on the SDGs, really find solutions for this, and help young entrepreneurs, more established entrepreneurs, and bring the knowledge triangle actors together to develop these solutions and create the next set of companies, connect with investors around Europe. And then from there we went into Horizon Europe, again had to convince the stakeholders to believe in us and give us the next budget, and we will try to do this again for the next cycle after 2027, based on the result and impact we're already having and the one that the KICs are delivering. So yeah, this is where we came from, and this is a bit where we're going with very vast EIT community now of alumni, of thousands of companies that have been helped, of thousands of partners that participated in funded activities that are contributing their own financing also in these activities. So it's a very engaged community across Europe nowadays.
And also, I believe, to adding to what Laurent said, it's very important for the economics of Europe as well, right? Independency of Europe in having our own way of, innovating, inventing, and also commercializing it, right? So what has been done in the past Europe has been always successful in science and bringing new ideas, but unfortunately on commercializations, we have, US have done a better job. So I think we are, this exchange is also helping us, because I think as EU, we are, we have so many good science and so many good scientists. Can we just also invest in it and make it sure that they become, commercialized and huge and big, and so anyway, my passion is to create unicorns out of Europe, because how more unicorns, how more impact we have. So let's see how we're going to do with that.
There is a curiosity that came out of your earlier presentation, Laurent. You had, I think, made reference to the United Nations impact areas. And I was wondering if there was a similar place in the EIT channels of communication where a similar roadmap would be visible to people to be able to refer to. That's one thing, as people are learning about what EIT's mission and purpose and direction are, I think a roadmap would be interesting, but I don't know, maybe there is already a roadmap out there.
Yeah, I mean, there are many entry points to the EIT vast community. Obviously, the EIT website is one. Each knowledge innovation committee has its own website, social media channels, and in there we try to really direct the offerings to the people who visit based on who they are, which sector, what are their needs, what are they trying to achieve, and who they want to connect with, and if they're looking for funding or want to bring funding. So all this is being made available on our different websites, and also through these physical offices that we have, so people can also get more information there, talk to the already existing partners of these communities or the people who are working there for the, let's say, at the central level of these innovation communities. And then also the national contact points that we have in every European country. There's a menu of possibilities for innovators, entrepreneurs to review and get answers to their questions that we, we prepare for this national contact point. We update these contact points on a almost monthly or bi-monthly basis with the latest offering. And so, and then to your question to the SDGs, I think this is quite visible on the KICs themselves, on the knowledge innovation community. So they're quite clear on what is their own mission, vision. This is also how they convince us, EIT, based on their initial proposal, what they want to solve, what is the impact, long-term impact they want to deliver against those SDGs. And then based on that, they also, they then develop product offerings based on really their intended impact, to focusing on a few SDGs each. So there is this, I don't know if it's a roadmap, it's not really a roadmap, it's more like a map. It's, mapping of the activities and mission against these SDGs. And yeah, as I was saying in my presentation, some KICs have several SDGs they are particularly working on. There's also some overlap, obviously, between KICs, but it's a good thing because these are big problems to solve. So there's a need to get impact and results from several KICs. And again, also in my presentation, I was saying they do it separately because they are born at different times, they have different set of partners, but also increasingly we activate them to work together on some of these really high needs that Europe has, but also in the planet as a whole. Many partners also come from Europe, outside of Europe, or they contribute. So partners from, I don't know, Japan, Israel, Norway, even the UK at some point. Now it's a little bit, we're still in transition because of Brexit, but these partners have contributed a lot just outside of the EU 27. So yeah, it's there. And more and more information is online, is in newsletters, and then you can talk to people as well. So people in the offices and those national contact points have the relevant information for people who are seeking that information.
I think what's most interesting, and I've said this to Samira as well, we've talked a few different times about the United States being so commercially focused, but one of the things I appreciate is that Europe is trying to take a very serious long-term vision and enact it. So looking at the sustainability of the planet, that is not a common vision across the world yet. I hope that it will one day be, but I think it's very interesting to look at what EIT means for that. And I think it's a very interesting tentpole. So I think, Samira, if you're okay with it, I think we can pretty much wrap up the session. There's a couple of remaining points in terms of the very last closing remarks. We've kind of talked about what's coming up next, but I think the big thing in terms of just kind of closing this out is We had, I think, a fairly successful session in terms of the event. We had a good set of panels, good content. It'll be interesting in the days ahead to pull these things apart and to, to see how they can be turned into ongoing community elements. I think one of the things that we have to do collectively is to look at where the interest areas most were and say, okay, if you were going to try and create some core communities around those interests, what would that look like? And that means that in turn, as a consequence, we should also, and we've talked about this a little bit, we should also send out a survey to not just the audience members who are here and our panelists who are here, but also to the broader set of folks who signed up to participate in this event to see what their interests are and to see if we can get some data out of that. This, I think, will be key to creating the kind of Silicon Valley driven, the EIT Hub Silicon Valley driven Web3 community that we're kind of imagining here. So with that being said, I think we have some work to do in terms of just going back through some of the content. We have some work to do in terms of sending out some surveys. And I want to say to all of our attendees who have stayed on throughout, please look for further communication from EIT. Look for more messaging about what's going to come up in 2023. Look for more questions. We want your feedback. This has been, I think, a valuable and productive set of panels today, but we also want to know what else would drive your interest, what else would drive your participation. So definitely look for those things coming out as calls to action and further takeaways from this event. That being said, I want to turn it back to yourself, Laurent, yourself, Samira, to close this out, and we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to everyone, and thank you for the ones that they stayed so long around. It's just been a long panel, I know. So anyway, thank you, John Michael, for, by the way, this has been a great work. Thank you for all your work you have done so far with us. So yeah, and Laurent, I give you the last word, and
yeah, it seems a big thank you from me. I mean, just to you both, Samira, John Michael, also all the panelists that join from the different part of the EIT community, or investors or speakers that you brought also from the US. This was very, both sides of the Atlantic today. So although you're on the Pacific side, some of you, but this was very good, very, very relevant content. I think we'll make the video available because I think many more people would watch it offline later on. And this will be very valuable content. And just to say, this was also part of this INNOVEIT series of events that we had since mid-September across Europe, and also with an event, I think, in Israel. And so we really try to showcase the EIT through the different activities we do. We had a series of 10 events with a big final also in Brussels, but then across Europe in all the countries. And this one was an important part of this series. And then, I'll leave you in good hands because I think this Web3 community will grow, and then you will organize more of your own webinars and grow this community. And again, the content was very, very high level today, thanks to the speakers. So special thanks go to them because they contributed a lot. So much appreciated from our side.
Absolutely. Right. And with that, I'll go ahead and close out the recording, and we can wrap it up.